I don't think I'll ever go back to that cabin. Not after what happened. The drive alone was enough to make me second-guess the trip. A long stretch of road cutting through thick woods, the kind where the trees lean in like they're watching. My tires crunched over gravel as I followed the GPS directions deeper into nowhere. I rented the place online. Cheap, remote, perfect for a weekend of quiet. At least that's what I thought. By the time I arrived, the sun was dipping low behind the trees. The cabin sat alone in a small clearing, an old structure with weather-worn wood and a sloping roof. No neighbors, no signs of life. Just silence except for the distant chirp of insects. I parked, grabbed my bag, and made my way inside. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and dust. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I explored. One bedroom, a small bathroom, a kitchen, and a living room with a stone fireplace. Simple, rustic, isolated. That first night, I chalked everything up to my own nerves. The feeling of being watched, just paranoia. The sound of something moving outside, just animals. It was the first time in a long time that I was truly alone. No city noise, no people, just silence pressing in from all sides. I sat by the fireplace, letting the warmth soak into my skin, trying to push away the unease curling in my gut. It was just a weekend, just a place. Sleep didn't come easy. The mattress was stiff, and the wind outside had a way of making the trees sound like whispering voices. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of something tapping against the cabin. Steady, rhythmic, tap, top, tap. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my breath held tight in my chest. Probably a branch. The wind, maybe. I didn't move. I just listened. The next morning, I walked around the cabin, checking for the source of the sound. There were no low-hanging branches near the walls. No loose parts on the cabin itself that could have made that noise. But there were footprints. Not mine. They circled the cabin, trailing off into the woods. They weren't deep, which meant whoever made them wasn't heavy. Barefoot. I stood there for a long time, staring at them, my stomach knotting. It had to be a prank. Some local kids messing with the outsider. That made sense. It had to be that. I spent the day inside, reading, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. The trees felt closer now, like they had shifted while I wasn't looking. By late afternoon, I decided I'd had enough. I wasn't going to let paranoia ruin my trip. I grabbed my keys and drove to the nearest town, about 30 minutes away. A small grocery store, a gas station, a diner. I grabbed some food and filled up my tank, but the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that people were looking at me a little too long. Maybe I was just on edge. Maybe I was imagining it. Back at the cabin, the sun was already setting. The woods felt darker, thicker. I locked the doors, double-checking the windows. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The tapping came back. Top, tap, top. Then a pause, like whoever or whatever was out there was waiting for me to react. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then, a sound from inside the cabin. A soft creak like weight shifting on old wood. I wanted to believe it was the house settling. I really did. But then I heard it again. Closer. My hands gripped the blanket tight, my body frozen in place. The air was thick with something I couldn't name. Something heavy, oppressive. I couldn't hear anything over the pounding of my own heartbeat. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The silence stretched on, long and suffocating. I stayed awake until the first light of morning crept through the curtains. The footprints were back. More of them, closer to the cabin this time, leading up to the windows, to the door. My stomach twisted. I didn't care if it was a prank. I wasn't staying another night. I grabbed my bag, shoved everything inside, and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered but didn't start. I tried again. Nothing. My breath came fast and shallow. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. I popped the hood, but I didn't know what I was looking for. Everything looked fine. No loose wires, no obvious damage. But the car wouldn't start. That's when I saw it. The footprints circling the car. My skin went cold. Someone had been out here, watching me, waiting. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course, I had no choice. I had to walk. The nearest town was miles away, but there was a road. If I stuck to it, I'd reach help eventually. I packed light, only the essentials. Water, a flashlight, a knife I had brought just in case. I locked up the cabin, even though it didn't matter anymore. I just needed to leave. The walk was slow, my ears tuned to every rustle, every snap of a twig. The road was empty, just me and the endless trees. An hour passed, then another. The sun was slipping lower, shadows stretching long across the ground. I kept walking. Then I saw something up ahead. A car, parked on the side of the road. Relief flooded me. I wasn't alone. I picked up my pace, waving my arms as I got closer. But as I neared, my relief curdled into dread. My car. It was my car, parked exactly as I had left it. But I had walked in a straight line. I hadn't turned. I hadn't veered off the road. My breath came in sharp gasps as I backed away. This wasn't possible. It wasn't possible. A sound came from the trees. Something moving. Slow. Deliberate. My eyes darted to the woods, my hands gripping the straps of my bag so tight my fingers ached. And then I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the tree line. Not moving, just watching. My legs locked up, my body screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. I could only stare. The figure was wrong. Something about the way it stood, the way its head tilted slightly, too calculated, too aware. My stomach twisted so violently I thought I would be sick. I don't remember running. I just remember the feeling of the ground beneath my feet, the burn in my lungs as I tore through the trees, ignoring the branches that whipped against my skin. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing onto the dirt. When I looked up, I was back at the cabin. The door was open. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes, darkness pressing in, that feeling of being watched growing heavier, closer. I must have passed out because when I woke up, it was morning. The sun was high. Birds chirped like nothing had happened. My car was back to where it had been before, the footprints gone. I didn't question it. I got in, turned the key, and this time the engine roared to life. I drove, watching the cabin shrink in the rearview mirror, and I didn't stop until I was miles away. I never told anyone. What would I even say? I don't know what happened out there. I don't want to know. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I hear it again. Tap.
Top.
Tap. I've always loved being in the wilderness. The way the trees stand tall and thick, the air crisp and cool. It felt like everything slowed down once you left the noise of the world behind. But that weekend changed everything. It was meant to be a quiet getaway, a break from the stress of city life. My friends and I had booked this small cabin deep in the woods. It wasn't a typical vacation cabin. No fancy amenities or over-the-top decor. It was just a wooden structure, small and cozy, far away from any sort of civilization. That's what made it perfect. No one would bother us, and we'd have time to reconnect. I still remember the drive. The road started out paved and well-maintained, but soon it turned to gravel. Dust kicked up behind the tires, and the trees seemed to close in on both sides, making it feel like we were headed deeper into something that wasn't quite natural. I didn't think much of it at first. We were excited, talking and joking, eager to get to the cabin. But as the car bounced over the uneven road, I started to get an uncomfortable feeling in my chest. It wasn't fear, exactly, more like an unsettled feeling, like something was off. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was starting to dip below the horizon. The shadows from the trees stretched long across the yard. The cabin was a simple two-story building, looking as if it had been there for decades, maybe longer. The windows were small and dark, the porch steps weathered and creaky. There was no one else around for miles. It was peaceful in a way, but it also felt isolated. We unloaded our bags, and I could tell the others were just as eager to settle in. The inside was just as basic as the outside. Wooden floors, a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a few worn-out sofas. but it was cozy, the kind of place you could easily imagine yourself spending a weekend in. We started a fire, cracked open some drinks, and relaxed. The whole night passed easily, filled with casual conversation, laughter, and the crackling of the fire. It was later, when everyone else had gone to bed, that things started to feel strange. I was lying on the couch, still awake, staring into the fire. I heard the wind rustling outside, the branches creaking. Then, a sound broke through, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. I froze. It wasn't the wind. It was clear as day. Someone had opened the cabin door, but no one was awake except for me. I sat up slowly, straining my ears. There was nothing. No footsteps, no sound of anyone moving around. Just silence. I stood up and walked cautiously toward the door. The room was dim, lit only by the firelight and a few lamps. The door, which had been securely shut before, was now slightly ajar. I didn't know what to make of it. I checked the other rooms. Everyone was asleep, as they should be. I went back to the door, looking out into the darkness, but saw nothing. No movement, no figures, just the black night. I closed the door again, locked it, and went back to the couch. I tried to shake the feeling off, telling myself it was just the wind or some animal outside, but I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining someone standing outside, just beyond my line of sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. The next day was fine. We spent the morning hiking, took a swim in the lake nearby, and spent the afternoon lounging around the cabin. The uneasy feeling didn't disappear entirely, but I pushed it to the back of my mind. As the sun started to set again, we all gathered around the fire pit outside. The night was clear, the sky full of stars. We talked, we laughed, and I felt myself finally starting to relax. It wasn't until later that night, when I was the last one awake again, that the strange feeling came back. The air felt heavy, and the usual sounds of the forest were muted, as if everything had gone still. Then the door creaked open again. I stood up immediately, my heart pounding in my chest. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the flashlight from the shelf and crept toward the door. As I reached for the handle, the door slammed shut on its own, causing me to jump back. My breath was shallow, my mind racing. I didn't know what was happening. I checked the windows, the back door, every room. There was no sign of anyone, nothing unusual. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. The next morning, I told my friends what had happened. They laughed it off, said it was probably the wind, or maybe an animal trying to get inside. I wanted to believe that too, but something in me couldn't. The door had been opened from the inside, not the outside, and I wasn't imagining that. We decided to leave the next day. We packed up our stuff and got ready to head back to the city. I was relieved to leave, relieved to be away from whatever it was that made the cabin feel wrong. But when I went to check out, the cabin owner, a grizzled man in his 60s, caught my attention. He had been quiet all weekend, mostly staying inside his own house next to the cabin. When I went to hand him the keys, he stopped me. "You're leaving already?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah," I said. "We just wanted a quick getaway. It was great, but I think we've all had enough. The place is nice, though." The man gave me a strange look, like he was sizing me up. Then he nodded, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "You might want to be careful about coming back here," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "There's things in these woods that don't like company." I didn't know what to say. I smiled awkwardly and handed him the keys. He took them, but his gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than was comfortable. As I turned to leave, he added one more thing. "You might want to watch your back on the way out, and don't ever go near the old shed by the trees. It's better if you don't know what's inside." I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured he was just one of those odd locals who liked to tell creepy stories. But as I drove down the gravel road, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. The trees, thick and oppressive, seemed to close in around me, like they were trying to swallow the road whole. It wasn't until later, when I was back in the city, that I realized something. There had been no animals, no birds, no sounds of rustling leaves, no normal forest noises. It had been silent, too silent, and the door, The door had been opened from the inside, but no one had been inside. Not that I could see. Maybe I'll never know what happened that weekend. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks, a result of the isolation and the quiet. Or maybe, just maybe, there was something in those woods, a presence that didn't like being disturbed. Either way, I know one thing for sure. I'll never go back. I don't know what's out there, but I'm not going to find out. The GPS had glitched about 20 miles back, rerouting me onto a narrow, winding road that cut through dense forest. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches scraping against the sides of my car like skeletal fingers. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the last remnants of daylight were fading fast. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I wasn't even sure where I was anymore. The map on my phone showed nothing but a blank expanse of green. No towns, no gas stations, just endless wilderness. My gas tank was hovering just above empty, and the thought of being stranded out here made my stomach twist. That's when I saw it. A small, weathered cabin tucked back among the trees. It wasn't much, just a single-story structure with a sagging roof and peeling paint. The windows were dark, no sign of life inside, but there was a faint glow from a distant street lamp, or maybe a porch light, that made it just visible through the trees. A driveway, overgrown with weeds, led up to it. I hesitated. Breaking into someone's property wasn't exactly legal, but neither was freezing to death in my car. I pulled over, killed the engine, and sat there for a long moment, listening to the silence. No birds, no wind, just the occasional creak of my cooling car. I stepped out. The air was colder than I expected, biting through my jacket. My breath came out in short, visible puffs as I walked toward the cabin, my boots crunching on dead leaves and twigs. The front porch groaned under my weight, the wood soft with rot. The door was slightly ajar. That should have been my first warning. I pushed it open, wincing at the loud screech of rusted hinges. The inside was musty, thick with the smell of damp wood and something else. Something metallic. Blood? No, maybe just old rust. The floorboards creaked under my steps as I moved deeper inside. The cabin was small, just one main room with a kitchenette in the corner, a moth-eaten couch, and a fireplace filled with cold ashes. A hallway led to what I assumed was a bedroom and bathroom. The walls were bare except for a single, crooked painting of a forest. The colors faded with age. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course, I wasn't planning on staying long, just until morning, when I could flag down a passing car or walk until I found help. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A trapdoor in the floor, partially hidden beneath a frayed rug. I shouldn't have looked. I know that now, but curiosity has a way of overriding common sense. I knelt, gripped the rusted metal ring, and pulled. The door opened with a groan, revealing a set of narrow wooden stairs descending into darkness. The smell that wafted up was worse down here. Damp earth, mildew, and something sickly sweet. Rot. My phone's flashlight barely pierced the blackness. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was small, the walls lined with rough-hewn wooden shelves. Jars filled with murky liquids sat in rows, their contents unidentifiable in the dim light. And then I saw the table. Sturdy, metal, bolted to the floor. Stains, dark and old, covered its surface. Leather straps hung from the sides, the buckles rusted but still intact. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just a cabin. A sound from above made me freeze. A footstep, then another. Someone was inside the cabin. I killed the flashlight, plunging myself into total darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure it could be heard. The footsteps moved slowly, deliberately, across the floor above me. A floorboard creaked directly overhead. I didn't breathe. The footsteps stopped. Then a scrape, the trapdoor being moved. I backed up, my shoulders hitting the shelves. One of the jars wobbled, then fell, shattering on the concrete floor. The sound was deafening. Silence, then a chuckle. Low, amused, I ran. I didn't think, just bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time. A hand grabbed my ankle. I kicked back blindly, my heel connecting with something solid. A grunt of pain, then my leg was free. I scrambled up, slammed the trapdoor shut, and dragged the couch over it. The banging started immediately, fists pounding against the wood, shaking the whole floor. I didn't wait to see if it would hold. I sprinted for the door, burst outside, and didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life and I peeled out, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't look back. The road twisted endlessly, but I didn't slow down. Not until I saw the first flicker of streetlights in the distance. A gas station. Civilization. I pulled in, my entire body trembling. The clerk behind the counter gave me a strange look as I stumbled inside. My clothes dirty, my face pale. "You all right?" he asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. Instead, I just nodded, bought a bottle of water, and walked back to my car. I didn't sleep that night. I just drove, putting as much distance between me and that cabin as possible. And even now, months later, I still see it in my dreams. The dark basement, the jars, the table, and the laughter. I never should have taken that shortcut. The road was barely visible under the thick layer of snow. My headlights cut through the darkness, but the storm was getting worse. The wind howled, shaking the car like it wanted to tip me over. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. The GPS had stopped working miles ago, and now I was just driving blind, hoping to find some kind of shelter. I shouldn't have taken this shortcut. The trees loomed on either side of the road, their branches heavy with snow, swaying like skeletal fingers reaching for me. My breath fogged up the windshield, and I wiped it away with my sleeve. The heater wasn't doing much, just blowing cold air now. My fingers were numb, and my legs ached from pressing the pedals so hard. Then, through the swirling snow, I saw it. A cabin. It was small, old, the wood dark and rotting in places. The roof sagged under the weight of the snow, and one of the windows was boarded up. But it was shelter. Better than freezing to death in my car. I pulled over, the tires crunching in the snow. The engine sputtered and died as I turned the key. Silence. Just the wind screaming through the trees. I grabbed my backpack, the only thing I had with me, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit me like a punch. My boots sank into the snow, and the wind bit at my face. I pulled my jacket tighter and trudged toward the cabin. The front door was slightly open, creaking back and forth in the wind. I pushed it open further, the hinges groaning. The inside was dark, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and something else. Something rotten. I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dust and cobwebs, revealing a single room with a rusted stove in the corner, a broken table, and a moth-eaten couch. No one had been here in years. I shut the door behind me, but it didn't block out the wind completely. The cold still seeped in through the cracks in the walls. I dropped my bag on the floor and rubbed my hands together, blowing warm air into them. I needed to start a fire. There was some old firewood stacked near the stove, dry enough to burn. I stuffed a few pieces inside, then grabbed some crumpled newspaper from the floor. My lighter flickered to life, and soon, flames licked at the wood. The heat was weak at first, but slowly, the cabin warmed. I sat on the couch, the springs digging into my back, and stared into the fire. The wind outside sounded like whispers, like someone was out there, talking just loud enough for me to almost hear. I shook my head. Just the storm. Then I heard it. A creak. Not from the wind. Not from the old cabin settling. From inside. I froze. The fire crackled, but beyond that, there was another sound. Soft, careful, like footsteps. I turned my head slowly, the beam of my flashlight sweeping across the room. Nothing, just shadows. But then another creak. Closer this time. My heart hammered in my chest. I wasn't alone. I stood up, my legs shaky, and grabbed the only thing I could use as a weapon, a rusted poker from beside the stove. The metal was cold in my grip. The sound came again. From the far corner, near the boarded-up window, I took a step forward, my breath coming fast. The flashlight trembled in my hand. Then I saw it. A figure, hunched, ragged clothes hanging off its frame. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could see its hands, long fingers, nails black with dirt. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some fairy tale monster. It was a man, a real, living man, and he was staring right at me. I stumbled back, my foot catching on the uneven floor. The poker slipped from my grip, clattering to the ground. The man didn't move, just stood there breathing heavily. Then he took a step forward. I didn't wait. I turned and ran for the door, my hands fumbling with the handle. The wind slammed it shut before I could pull it open. I yanked again, my fingers numb with fear. Behind me, the footsteps came faster. I threw my shoulder against the door, and it burst open. Snow and wind rushed in, blinding me for a second. I didn't look back. I just ran. The snow was deep, dragging at my legs. I could hear him behind me, his breath ragged, his feet crunching in the snow. My car was only a few yards away. I reached it, my hands shaking as I grabbed the door handle. Locked. I had locked it. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers stiff with cold. The man was getting closer. I could hear him now, grunting, his steps uneven. The keys slipped from my grip, vanishing into the snow. I dropped to my knees, digging frantically. Where were they? Where? A hand grabbed my shoulder. I screamed, twisting away. The man's face was inches from mine. Sunken cheeks, yellowed teeth, eyes wide and wild. He didn't say anything, just tightened his grip. I swung my fist, hitting him in the jaw. He staggered but didn't let go. His other hand came up, clutching something, a rock. I ducked as he swung. The rock grazed my temple, sending a sharp pain through my skull. I kicked out, my boot connecting with his knee. He groaned, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench free. I didn't stop to fight. I ran. The trees swallowed me, the snow hiding my tracks. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Behind me, I heard him shouting, his voice raw and furious, but the storm drowned him out. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out. I collapsed behind a fallen tree, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't move for hours. When the snow finally stopped, when the first light of dawn crept through the trees, I stood on shaking legs. The cabin was far behind me now, and the man was gone. But I knew one thing: I would never take a shortcut again. The GPS had blinked out 20 miles back, leaving me with nothing but a paper map and the dim glow of my phone. The road twisted through the trees like a snake, narrow and uneven, the kind of path that made my tires skid on loose gravel. Rain had started an hour ago, slow at first, then heavy, drumming against the roof of the car like impatient fingers. The wipers groaned as they pushed the water away, barely keeping up. I was lost. The headlights cut through the dark, illuminating the slick black road ahead. But beyond that, nothing. Just trees, thick, towering pines that leaned in like they were watching. My hands clenched the wheel, knuckles white. I should have stayed on the main highway, should have ignored the detour sign. But the idea of shaving an hour off my trip had been too tempting. Then I saw it, a cabin. It sat just off the road, half hidden by overgrown bushes and sagging branches. The wood was old, weathered gray from years of neglect. The roof dipped in the middle, as if something heavy had settled on it long ago. One window was shattered, the glass jagged like teeth. The front door hung slightly open, swaying just a little in the wind. I slowed the car, staring. No lights, no car parked outside, no signs of life, but it was shelter. The rain was coming down harder now, slamming against the windshield in sheets. The thought of spending the night in my car, listening to the storm and the creaking trees, made my skin crawl. The cabin wasn't much, but it was dry. Probably, I pulled over, killed the engine. The sudden silence was worse than the rain. Just the sound of water dripping from the leaves, the occasional groan of branches rubbing together. I grabbed my phone, checked the signal, nothing. Of course, I stepped out. The cold hit me first, sharp and wet. The ground was soft under my boots, mud sucking at my soles as I walked toward the cabin. The air smelled like damp earth and something else, something sour like old meat. I ignored it. The porch steps creaked under my weight. The door groaned as I pushed it open wider, hinges screaming. Inside, the darkness was thick, stale. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dust. The cabin was small, one room mostly, a rusted wood stove in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, both overturned. A moth-eaten blanket lay crumpled near the fireplace. The floorboards were warped, some broken, showing gaps of blackness beneath. The walls were bare except for a single nail where a picture might have hung once. And then I saw the blood. It was old, dried to a rusty brown, smeared across the floor in uneven streaks. A trail of it led toward a door at the back of the room. A closet, maybe. My breath caught. Someone had been hurt here. I should have left, should have turned around, sprinted back to the car, driven until I found a town or a gas station or anywhere but here. But I didn't. I stepped closer. The door was slightly open. I reached out, pushed it. The smell hit me like a punch, rotten, thick, clogging my nose and throat. I gagged, stumbled back. The beam of my phone shook as I aimed it inside. There was a body, a man. He was slumped against the wall, legs bent at wrong angles. His skin was gray, bloated, stretched tight over his bones. His mouth hung open, blackened tongue lolling. His eyes were gone, just hollow sockets staring at nothing. His clothes were torn, stiff with dried blood. One hand was curled into a claw, fingers broken, nails ripped off, and around his neck a wire, thin, rusted, biting deep into his flesh. Someone had strangled him. My heart hammered against my ribs. I backed away, fast, my boots thudding on the creaking floor. The air felt too thick, too heavy. I needed to get out. Now, then I heard it. A sound outside, a footstep, the crunch of gravel under a boot. I froze. Someone was here. The rain had masked their approach, but now I could hear them moving, slow, deliberate. Another step, closer. I turned off my phone's light. Darkness swallowed me whole. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a knock. One sharp rap on the cabin door. I didn't breathe. Another knock. Harder this time. The door creaked as weight pressed against it. I backed toward the closet, toward the dead man. My pulse roared in my ears. The floorboard under my foot groaned. The knocking stopped. A long pause. Then, the door flew open. A figure stood in the doorway, tall, silhouetted by the storm. Rain dripped from their coat, their hat pulled low. They didn't move, just stood there, watching. I held my breath. Then they stepped inside. The floor creaked under their weight. They moved slow, methodical, like they knew the place, like they'd been here before. I pressed myself against the wall, willing myself to disappear. The dead man's arm brushed my leg. Cold, stiff. The figure stopped in the middle of the room. They turned their head, looking right at me. I didn't wait. I lunged, not toward them, toward the window. The glass shattered as I crashed through, shards slicing my arms, my face. Cold air rushed in. I hit the ground hard, rolled, scrambled to my feet. Behind me, the cabin door slammed open. I ran. Branches whipped at me, thorns tearing my clothes, my skin. The rain blinded me. The mud tried to drag me down. I didn't look back, didn't stop. I reached the car. Where were my keys? My pockets. Yes. I fumbled them out, jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life. In the rearview mirror, the figure emerged from the trees. Watching, I slammed the gas. The tires spun, caught, and the car shot forward. The cabin disappeared behind me, swallowed by the storm. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up. I never went back. But sometimes, when it rains, I still hear the knocking. The road was supposed to save me time, a narrow dirt path cutting through the woods, barely wide enough for my car. The GPS had glitched miles back, leaving me with nothing but a fading signal and a paper map I could barely read in the dimming light. The trees pressed in on both sides, branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers. The air smelled damp, thick with the scent of rotting leaves and wet earth. I told myself it was fine. Just a few more miles, and I'd hit the main road. But then the engine sputtered, a sharp, metallic cough from under the hood. The car jerked, the wheel vibrating under my grip. I barely had time to pull over before it died completely. Silence, just the slow ticking of cooling metal and the whisper of wind through the trees. I sat there for a long moment, hands gripping the wheel, listening to my own breathing. No cell service, no other cars, just me and the endless woods. I stepped out, the ground soft under my boots. The trees loomed taller now, their shadows stretching long and twisted in the fading light. I popped the hood, already knowing it wouldn't help. I knew nothing about cars. The engine was a mess of wires and metal, nothing I could fix. I turned, scanning the road behind me. Nothing but dirt and trees. Ahead, the road curved into darkness. Then I saw it, a cabin, tucked back in the trees, half hidden by overgrown bushes. Old wooden, the roof sagging in the middle. The windows were dark, the door slightly ajar. I hesitated. Something about it felt wrong. The way it sat there, like it had been waiting. But what choice did I have? Night was coming. The temperature was dropping. I grabbed my backpack, the weight of it comforting. A flashlight, a half-empty water bottle, a pocket knife. Not much, but better than nothing. The first step toward the cabin made my skin prickle. The air felt heavier here, thick with the smell of mildew and something else. Something sour, like old meat. The porch groaned under my weight, the wood soft with rot. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust. The floorboards were warped, sagging in places. A single room, a rusted wood stove in the corner, a table with a broken leg, a moth-eaten couch. The walls were covered in yellowed newspaper, peeling at the edges. And the smell, worse now, rotten. I shone my flashlight around, the beam cutting through the dust. There were marks on the floor, deep scratches like something had been dragged. My throat tightened. Then I saw the door. At the back of the room, barely visible behind a tattered curtain. A basement door, old wooden with a heavy latch. It was open, just a crack. I didn't want to go near it, but the silence was worse. The way the house seemed to hold its breath. I stepped closer. The smell was stronger here, wet earth and something metallic. Blood. My fingers touched the door. It swung open with a slow, grating whine. Darkness. A set of rough wooden stairs descending into black. I pointed the flashlight down. The beam barely reached the bottom. Something glinted. Glass? Metal? Then I heard it. A sound from below. A scrape. Like something moving. I froze. Another scrape. Then a thump. Something was down there. I backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. The door creaked again, swinging slightly, as if something had brushed against it. I turned and ran. Out the front door, down the porch steps, into the trees. Branches lashed at my arms, my face. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until the cabin was far behind me. I don't know how long I wandered. Hours, maybe. The woods seemed endless. But eventually, I saw headlights. A truck rumbling down a distant road. I screamed, waved my arms, nearly collapsing with relief when it stopped. The driver took me to the nearest town. I never told him about the cabin, never mentioned the basement. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that door, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd gone down those stairs. I wonder if it would have let me come back up. I had been driving for hours, winding through long stretches of empty road, the kind where the trees lean in just a little too close and the only company is the occasional sign warning of deer crossings. It was late September, and the leaves were starting to change, the trees bursting with reds and oranges. My destination was a small cabin in the woods, one I had rented for a week to get away from everything. No work, no emails, no people. Just me, the quiet, and the promise of fresh air away from the city. The further I drove, the more isolated it became. The last gas station I passed was about 20 miles back, and there hadn't been another car on the road in at least an hour. Eventually, the asphalt ended, giving way to a gravel road filled with potholes. My car groaned every time I hit one, but I kept going, watching the sun begin to dip behind the treetops. After what felt like forever, I finally saw it, the cabin. It was small, nothing fancy. Wooden walls, a pitched roof, a front porch with a single rocking chair. The kind of place that could have been built 100 years ago. There was a driveway, but no garage. Just enough space for my car to sit under the shadow of the trees. I stepped out, stretching my legs, and listened. Nothing but the distant sound of birds and the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. It was perfect. Inside, it was even simpler than I had imagined. A single room with a kitchenette, a small dining table, a couch, and a fireplace. A door led to what I assumed was the bedroom and bathroom. There was no TV, just a radio on the shelf and a stack of old books. The air smelled like wood and dust, like the cabin had been sitting here untouched for years. The first night was uneventful. I made some dinner, read a book by the dim light of a lamp, and eventually crawled into bed. The mattress was stiff, the sheets cold. I fell asleep listening to the wind whistle through the trees. I don't know what woke me up, but something did. The kind of wake up where your whole body goes alert in an instant. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I listened. Nothing, just the wind outside. I told myself it was nothing. Probably just my brain getting used to the silence after years of city noise. Still, it took a while to fall back asleep. The next morning, I went outside to take in the fresh air. The world was quiet, except for the occasional crunch of leaves as small animals scurried through the underbrush. But then I noticed something strange. Footprints. They were faint, but they were there, leading from the tree lean to the cabin's porch. My stomach tightened. I hadn't seen another person for miles. Maybe it had been a hunter passing through, but the prints led to the steps and stopped there. They didn't go back the way they came. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I had just missed them when I arrived. Maybe they were mine, distorted by the wind overnight. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, I locked the door. It wasn't much of a lock, just a simple latch, but it made me feel better. I stoked the fireplace and sat on the couch, reading by firelight. The wind had picked up outside, howling through the trees. It almost drowned out the noise. Almost. It was faint, just barely audible over the wind. A creak like weight shifting on wooden planks. My stomach dropped. It had come from the porch. I didn't move. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Then another creak. The rocking chair. The damn rocking chair. It had been still all day, but now it was moving. I stood up slowly, my body tight with fear. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the walls. I moved toward the window and peered out. The porch was empty. The chair rocked back and forth slightly before settling into stillness. Just the wind, I told myself. Just the wind. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep well. Every sound made me jolt awake. At some point, exhaustion won over and I drifted off. Morning came. I stepped outside, half expecting to see nothing. But there they were, new footprints leading to the porch again. I crouched down, looking closer. They weren't mine. They were larger, heavier. They stopped at the same place as before, right in front of the door. I was being watched. I spent the day inside, listening for anything out of place. The radio crackled static when I tried to turn it on, so I gave up. I kept checking the window, looking out at the trees. They stood tall, unmoving. That night, I barely slept. The wind was worse, slamming against the cabin. Around midnight, a loud bang startled me upright. It had come from outside. I grabbed the flashlight and, against every instinct telling me to stay put, I crept toward the window. Shining the beam outside, I saw movement near the tree lean. Just a shape, disappearing behind the trees. I locked the door. I checked it twice. Then I pushed the couch in front of it. I sat up, heart pounding, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing came. Eventually, exhaustion took over. The next morning, I made my decision. I was leaving. I packed quickly, barely stopping for anything. I stepped outside, scanning the treeline. The world felt too quiet. Then I saw them. More footprints circling the cabin this time, walking around it again and again. I felt sick. I got into my car and turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I didn't waste another second. Gravel kicked up as I sped down the road, not looking back. Hours later, I finally reached a town, stopping at a gas station just to breathe. I told myself I had imagined it, that it was probably just some hermit living in the woods, that I wasn't in danger. But I knew that wasn't true. Someone had been out there, watching, waiting, and I had no idea what would have happened if I had stayed another night. I had always imagined the perfect getaway to be a secluded cabin in the woods. No distractions, no noise, just peace and quiet. So when I saw the ad for a cabin rental deep in the forest, I didn't hesitate. It was cheap, tucked away in a remote area, and looked exactly like what I was searching for. My friends thought it sounded like a great idea, so we all packed our bags and headed out. The drive there was longer than expected. We'd gone through miles of winding, narrow roads that seemed to disappear into the trees. I had to slow down a lot to navigate the sharp curves, and the further we went, the more the landscape changed. The trees grew thicker, blocking out much of the sunlight. It felt like the forest was swallowing us whole, and the road seemed to shrink with every mile. There was no sign of civilization, just trees and rocks and the occasional bird fluttering by. I didn't mind the isolation at first. It felt like a peaceful escape from everything. When we finally arrived, the cabin was even more isolated than I thought it would be. It was small, made of weathered wood with a stone chimney on the side. There was no one around for miles, just the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of a creek. The whole area felt unnervingly quiet. I had expected that, but something about the silence felt heavy, almost oppressive. Inside the cabin was surprisingly cozy. The furniture was old, but it gave the place a rustic charm. A large stone fireplace sat in the center of the living room, and a few windows looked out over the forest. The kitchen was small, just enough space for a few people to cook, but I liked it. Everything was functional, though the whole place had an eerie, forgotten feel to it. Dust had settled on the shelves, and the walls seemed like they hadn't been touched in years. We decided to settle in, unpack our things, and explore the area. The surrounding woods seemed to stretch out endlessly, and the thought of hiking around in that solitude was exciting. But as I took a deep breath of the cool air and looked out into the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The first night was uneventful. We cooked dinner, laughed over stories, and enjoyed the quiet. The fire crackled in the fireplace, and the air outside grew colder. It was peaceful in an unsettling way, but I didn't want to let that ruin the fun. We all went to bed early, as there was no real reason to stay up. The silence outside was so thick, it almost seemed unnatural. But the next morning, things began to feel different. I woke up earlier than usual, to a strange sound. It wasn't the wind or the usual forest noises. It was something else, a dull, rhythmic thudding, almost like something was tapping on the walls. At first, I thought it was the house settling, but it felt too deliberate. I stood up and walked around the cabin, peering out the windows, but there was nothing unusual. No animals, no movement, just the same thick forest. I brushed it off, assuming it was nothing, and went about my day. As the day went on, the feeling of being watched intensified. Couldn't shake it, no matter how hard I tried. Every time I looked out the windows, I thought I saw shadows moving in the trees, just at the edge of my vision. When I'd turn my head, they'd be gone. But every time I looked again, the shadows would shift. I couldn't explain it. The air felt heavier now, like it was closing in on us. I didn't say anything to the others at first. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but when I caught one of them looking out the window with the same uneasy expression, I realized I wasn't the only one feeling it. We all began to notice small things that didn't make sense. Doors that would be left ajar when we were sure we'd closed them, lights flickering for no reason, and strange noises that didn't seem to come from the wind. It felt like the cabin was alive in some way, watching us. That night, things escalated. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The house was too quiet, and the longer I lay there, the more unsettled I became. Then I heard it, the tapping. This time it was louder, closer. It was coming from the walls, but it didn't sound like something natural. The rhythm was off, like a slow, deliberate knocking. My heart started to race. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling again, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, like something was scraping against the wood. I couldn't stand it anymore. I got out of bed and grabbed a flashlight, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain the sound. I moved through the cabin, shining the beam of light around, but everything seemed normal, until I reached the back room. The door was slightly cracked open, though we had all made sure to lock it when we first arrived. I pushed the door open slowly, shining the light into the dark room. It was empty, just a bed and an old dresser. But as I walked in, I felt something change in the air. It was thick with a strange tension. The sound was gone now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I turned to leave, but then I saw it. On the floor, near the corner of the room, was a small pile of dirt. At first, I thought it was just dust, but when I crouched down, I saw it wasn't dust at all. The dirt had been disturbed recently. I could tell because the edges were uneven, like someone had been digging. But there was no reason for anyone to dig in this room. There was no sign of anything buried there, but my stomach dropped as I realized it didn't make sense. I ran back to the others, waking them up and telling them about what I'd found. They didn't seem as alarmed as I was, but they agreed it was strange. We decided to search the cabin together, hoping we could find some kind of explanation. But no matter how much we looked, nothing made sense. There were no signs of animals getting in, no broken windows, no signs of forced entry. Everything was locked up tight. The next morning, we packed up our things and decided to leave. The unease had become too much to handle. We weren't far from the road when I turned around and saw the cabin in the distance, standing quietly among the trees. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in the upper window, like someone was watching us. But when I blinked, it was gone. We didn't speak much on the way home. The silence between us was heavy, like we all felt the same thing but didn't know how to talk about it. The further we drove away from that cabin, the more the tension lifted, and by the time we reached the main road, I felt like I could breathe again. Looking back now, I can't explain what happened. I don't know what we saw or what we felt, but something in that cabin wasn't right. Maybe it was just our minds playing tricks on us, or maybe the forest had a strange way of getting under our skin. But whatever it was, I know one thing for sure: I'll never go back there. And if I can help it, I'll never set foot in a cabin like that again. The woods have a way of hiding things we're not meant to find. And sometimes what you can't explain is the most terrifying thing of all. The road was supposed to save me time. A narrow strip of cracked asphalt winding through dense forest, barely touched by sunlight even at noon. My GPS had glitched out miles back, leaving me with nothing but a fading signal and a paper map I barely knew how to read. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches scraping against the sides of my car like skeletal fingers. Then the engine sputtered, a choked, gurgling sound, and just like that, the car rolled to a stop. No warning, no check engine light, just silence. I turned the key again and again, but nothing happened. The dashboard lights flickered weakly before dying completely. I stepped out into the cold. The air smelled like damp earth and rotting leaves. No cars had passed me in over an hour, and my phone had no signal. The sun was already sinking behind the trees, stretching shadows across the road. I had no choice. I grabbed my backpack, locked the car, and started walking. The forest swallowed the road behind me within minutes. Every crunch of leaves under my boots echoed too loud. The wind hissed through the branches, carrying whispers that weren't quite words. I kept my eyes forward, ignoring the way the shadows seemed to move just at the edge of my vision. Then I saw it, a cabin. It wasn't on the map. It wasn't supposed to be here. The place looked abandoned, its wooden walls warped and gray with age. The roof sagged in the middle, and the front porch creaked under my weight as I stepped onto it. The door hung slightly open, as if someone had left in a hurry. I shouldn't have gone inside. The smell hit me first: mold, damp wood, and something else, something metallic. The air was thick, clinging to my skin. The floorboards groaned under my steps, the sound too loud in the silence. Dust coated everything, swirling in the dim light that seeped through the grimy windows. A table sat in the middle of the room, its surface scratched and stained. Something dark had dried into the grooves of the wood. I didn't want to think about what it was. Then I saw the photographs. They were pinned to the wall, dozens of them, curling at the edges. Faces, men, women, some young, some old, all strangers, all with the same hollow, terrified look in their eyes. My stomach twisted. A noise from upstairs, a slow, deliberate creak, like someone shifting their weight on a loose floorboard. I wasn't alone. My breath came too fast. I backed toward the door, but my foot caught on something. A rusted bear trap, its jagged teeth waiting. I barely avoided it. Another creak, closer this time. I ran. The door slammed behind me as I crashed through the trees, branches whipping at my face. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. When I finally made it to the highway, a trucker picked me up. He asked no questions. I gave no answers. The police found my car the next day. The doors were still locked. The keys were still inside. But the trunk was open, and in the dirt beside it, there were footprints. Not mine. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to go out there alone. Maybe it was the stress. Work had been draining me. Life had become a cycle of the same dull routine, and I just wanted to be somewhere quiet, somewhere far from everything and everyone. So when I found the old cabin listed online, cheap and remote, I booked it without a second thought. The drive up was long, winding through dense forests and up narrow mountain roads. The trees pressed in close, their dark forms shifting under the weight of the wind. My phone lost service an hour before I even got there. That should have been the first warning. The cabin was exactly what I expected. Old, but sturdy. It was a single-story structure, built of thick logs, with a metal roof that rattled softly in the breeze. There was no electricity, just an old wood stove for heat and a stack of firewood piled up against the side. The well outside provided water, though it had a strange metallic taste. The inside was simple. One main room with a bed in the corner, a small table, and a few shelves. A single window looked out onto the trees. It felt isolated. Perfect. The first night was uneventful. I made a fire, ate the food I'd brought, and read by lantern light until I fell asleep. The silence was deep, like the forest had swallowed every sound. I liked it at first. The next morning, I went outside to stretch and get some air. That's when I saw them. Footprints, leading from the trees, stopping a few feet from the cabin door. They weren't mine. I had been inside all night. The prints were deep, pressed firmly into the dirt, like someone heavy had been standing there, watching. I looked around, but the woods were empty. The air was still. I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a hunter passing through. Maybe I had just missed them on my way in. I brushed it off. The second night, I heard something. It wasn't loud, just a faint shuffling outside the cabin. I sat up in bed, listening. The wind had died down, and the only thing I could hear was my own breathing. Then, a soft creak, like weight shifting on the wooden steps outside. I grabbed the axe I'd brought, crept to the window, and peered out. Nothing, just darkness. My own reflection stared back at me from the glass, eyes wide, shoulders tense. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I found more footprints. Closer this time, circling the cabin. I checked the trees, scanning for movement, but saw nothing. I was starting to feel trapped, boxed in by the forest, by whatever was out there. I told myself I'd leave the next morning. That night, something changed. I woke up to a noise. Not outside this time, inside. A slow, deliberate sound. Breathing. I held my breath, ears straining. It was right there, just feet away. I could feel it in the darkness, the weight of someone standing in the room with me. I reached for the lantern, my fingers shaking. When I lit it, the room was empty, but the door was open. I didn't remember leaving it open. I didn't remember hearing it open. That's when I knew. Someone had been inside. I didn't think. I grabbed my bag, threw on my boots, and ran. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I didn't care that I had miles of dark forest to get through. I just ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car, breath ragged, body shaking. The keys were in my pocket, my hands fumbling as I shoved them into the ignition. The engine turned over, and I peeled out of there, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't look back. By the time I got to town, the sun was rising. I parked in a gas station, sat there for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. I called the rental owner when I had service again. I didn't tell him everything, just that someone had been out there, that I didn't feel safe. He sighed on the other end, told me it wasn't the first time someone had said that. That was the last time I went looking for solitude. I don't know who was out there that night. I don't know what would have happened if I had stayed, and I don't want to know. I should have never gone up to that cabin alone. It seemed like a good idea at first. I wanted to clear my head, get away from the noise of the city, and just breathe for a while. My uncle's old hunting cabin, tucked deep in the woods about 20 miles from the nearest town, seemed like the perfect place to do that. It wasn't anything fancy, just a one-room structure with a small kitchen, a wood stove, and an outhouse about 50 feet away. No electricity, no running water, no phone signal, just quiet. I packed light, a couple of days' worth of food, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, extra batteries, a hunting knife, just the essentials. I wasn't worried about being out there alone. I had grown up hunting with my uncle in those same woods. I knew how to handle myself. The drive out there took a little over an hour, most of it on a winding dirt road that got narrower the farther I went. By the time I reached the clearing where the cabin sat, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows between the trees. I parked my truck about 20 yards away, grabbed my bag, and walked up the creaking steps to the door. The cabin smelled like old wood and dust, just like I remembered. I spent the first hour sweeping out dead leaves and clearing cobwebs. The place had been sitting empty for a while, and it showed. I lit a few candles, set up my sleeping bag on the cot, and then stepped outside to gather some firewood. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that lets you know winter is just around the corner. That first night, I didn't sleep well. The woods were quiet, too quiet. I had spent enough nights out there to know the usual sounds. Owls, rustling leaves, the distant yips of coyotes. But that night, there was nothing. Just the occasional creak of the trees swaying in the wind. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I wasn't used to being alone like this anymore. But every time I drifted off, I would wake up again, heart pounding, feeling like something wasn't right. The next day, I decided to go for a hike. There was an old trail behind the cabin that led up to a ridge overlooking a small valley. I had hiked it dozens of times before. It wasn't a long hike, maybe an hour each way, but by the time I got to the ridge, the air had changed. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of damp earth and something else. Something faint, but off. It reminded me of rotting wood, the kind you find when you kick over an old log that's been sitting in the rain for too long. I scanned the valley below. Nothing looked unusual, just trees stretching for miles. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned back, walking faster than before, listening to the sound of my own footsteps crunching against the dirt and dead leaves. When I got back to the cabin, I noticed something strange. The door was open, just a crack, but enough for me to know I hadn't left it that way. My stomach tightened. I pulled my knife from my belt and stepped inside. Everything looked the same at first, but then I saw it, the sleeping bag. It had been moved. It was bunched up like someone had sat on it or rummaged through it. I checked my bag. Nothing was missing, but the feeling of unease grew stronger. I stepped back outside, scanning the woods. The sun was starting to dip lower, and the long shadows had returned. I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe I hadn't closed the door all the way. Maybe the wind had moved the sleeping bag when it slipped through the crack. I locked the door this time, wedging a chair against it just in case, and built a fire in the wood stove. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise made me jolt awake. A branch snapped somewhere outside. Then another. Something was moving in the trees. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the sound. It was slow, deliberate. Not an animal. Animals don't move like that. I gripped my knife under the blanket, heart hammering. The footsteps circled the cabin, pausing every so often. I wanted to tell myself it was just a deer, maybe a bear, but deep down I knew better. Then silence. I lay there for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have drifted off because I woke up to a faint light filtering through the cracks in the wooden walls. The fire had burned down to embers. I sat up slowly, listening. Nothing, just the normal morning sounds. Birds, wind through the trees. I unbolted the door and stepped outside. The ground was damp from the night air. Then I saw them, footprints, human footprints. They circled the cabin and disappeared into the woods. My blood ran cold. I locked the door behind me, grabbed my bag, and threw everything inside. I wasn't staying another night. I stepped out onto the porch, scanning the trees. Nothing, but I could feel it, that same sense of being watched. I moved fast, making my way to the truck, but when I reached for the door handle, I stopped. My stomach turned to ice. The driver's side door was slightly open. I always locked my truck. Always. I pulled the door all the way open, my fingers tightening around the knife. The inside was empty, but my glove compartment was open. Papers were scattered on the floor. The keys were still in the ignition, though. That was the only thing that mattered. I started the truck, throwing it into reverse before the engine had even finished turning over. Gravel crunched under the tires as I backed out of the clearing, my eyes flicking between the trees. I didn't see anyone, but I knew they were there, watching. I didn't breathe normally until I was back on the main road, speeding toward town. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I wanted to believe it was just some drifter, maybe a hunter passing through, but something about it didn't feel random. I never went back to that cabin. My uncle asked me about it a few weeks later, said he'd gone up there and found the door wide open, my sleeping bag still on the cot. He asked me why I left in such a hurry. I just told him I changed my mind about staying. I never told him about the footprints, or the way someone had been out there watching me. And I never told him about the Polaroid he found on the floor inside the cabin. Picture of me, sleeping. The GPS had glitched about 20 miles back, rerouting me onto a narrow, unpaved road that cut through dense forest. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches scraping against the sides of my car like skeletal fingers. The headlights barely cut through the thick darkness, and the further I drove, the more the road seemed to dissolve into little more than a dirt trail. I thought about turning back, but the idea of navigating that winding path in reverse made my stomach tighten. So I kept going, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached, telling myself that eventually, I'd hit a main road again. Then the engine sputtered, a sharp, metallic cough from under the hood, and just like that, the car rolled to a stop. The dashboard lights flickered, then died. Silence. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the rapid thump of my own heartbeat. The forest around me was unnervingly still. No wind, no animals, nothing. Just the faint, distant creak of old trees settling. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. Swearing under my breath, I grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course. The air outside was cold when I stepped out, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. My breath came out in white puffs as I popped the hood, already knowing I wouldn't be able to fix whatever was wrong. I wasn't a mechanic. The engine looked like a mess of metal and wires, none of it making sense. I slammed the hood shut and turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. That's when I saw it. A faint, flickering light in the distance. A cabin. Relief washed over me. Maybe whoever lived there had a phone. Maybe they could help. I grabbed my jacket from the car and started walking. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks threatening to trip me with every step. The light grew brighter as I got closer, revealing a small, weathered cabin with a single window glowing dimly from within. The front porch groaned under my weight as I stepped onto it. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. Something felt off. The silence was too heavy. The air smelled damp, like wet earth and something else, something metallic. I knocked anyway. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The inside was a single room. A wooden table, a rusted stove, a cot in the corner. The light came from a single oil lamp on the table, its flame dancing weakly. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something sharper, something rotten. Then I saw the blood. A dark, sticky trail of it led from the center of the room to the cot. And on that cot was a man, or what was left of one. His throat had been cut so deep I could see the white of his spine. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, his mouth slack. His hands were clenched into fists, nails dug into his own palms. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. That's when I heard it. The soft crunch of footsteps outside. Someone was here. I looked around wildly for a weapon, grabbing a rusted hunting knife from the table. The footsteps were closer now, just outside the door. The knob turned. I didn't wait to see who it was. I lunged for the back window, throwing myself through it just as the door swung open. Glass shattered around me as I hit the ground outside, scrambling to my feet. I ran. Branches whipped at my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I heard the crash of someone chasing, their footsteps pounding against the earth. I didn't look back. The trees blurred around me as I sprinted, my lungs burning. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Then, suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath me. I fell, tumbling down a steep slope, rocks and roots tearing at my skin. I hit the bottom with a grunt, pain exploding through my side. When I looked up, I saw headlights. A road. I dragged myself toward it, my vision swimming. A truck roared past, then another. I waved my arms, screaming, my voice raw. The third truck stopped. The driver took one look at me, bloody, wild-eyed, and didn't ask questions. He helped me into the cab, his hand steady. As we sped away, I glanced back at the woods. For just a second, I thought I saw a figure standing at the tree line, watching. Then it was gone. The police found my car the next day. Empty. No signs of struggle. They searched the woods but never found the cabin. I didn't tell them about the body. Some things are better left buried. I don't know why I said yes. Maybe I felt like I had something to prove to myself. Maybe I was just tired of feeling like a coward. Either way, I took the offer to stay in the cabin alone for a weekend. No phone, no internet, just a stack of old books, a flashlight, and enough food to last me until Sunday. The cabin belonged to my uncle. He bought it decades ago as a hunting lodge, though I don't think he ever shot anything. It was deep in the woods, past the dirt roads, where the trees pressed in close, and the air smelled thick with pine and damp earth. The place had no electricity and no plumbing, just an old wood-burning stove, an outhouse about 50 feet from the back door, and a water pump that groaned like it hated being used. I arrived late Friday afternoon. The sun hung low, stretching shadows across the ground as I parked my truck near the porch. The place looked smaller than I remembered, weathered and sagging a little at the edges, like the forest was slowly trying to reclaim it. The wooden walls were dark with years of exposure, the roof uneven from repairs done by someone who wasn't exactly a carpenter. A single window faced the driveway, its glass reflecting the orange glow of the setting sun. I grabbed my bag and stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under my weight. The front door stuck when I tried to open it, and I had to throw my shoulder against it before it finally gave way with a groan. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of old wood, dust, and something faintly metallic. The place was just as simple as I remembered. A cot against one wall, a table with 2 chairs in the middle of the room, shelves lined with old canned goods, and a wood stove near the corner, cold and waiting. I dropped my bag onto the cot and set about getting settled. I stacked some logs into the stove, striking a match and watching as the flames caught. The warmth spread quickly, chasing away the early autumn chill that had crept into my bones. As the fire crackled, I took stock of my supplies. I had enough food, a couple of bottles of water just in case the pump gave me trouble, a flashlight with extra batteries, and a hunting knife my uncle insisted I bring. Just in case, he had said with a grin, but something in his eyes told me he wasn't entirely joking. By the time I had everything in order, the sun had dipped below the trees. The cabin felt smaller in the dark, the single oil lamp throwing flickering shadows across the walls. I ate a cold sandwich, read a few pages from one of the old books, and listened to the sounds of the woods. The wind rustled through the leaves, an owl hooted somewhere in the distance, and occasionally, I heard the scurrying of small animals in the underbrush. Normal forest sounds, nothing to worry about. I turned in early, wrapping myself in my sleeping bag and closing my eyes. The fire had died down to embers, the shadows deepening. As I lay there, I swore I heard something else, something faint, a soft, rhythmic thudding. I told myself it was a branch, maybe a woodpecker somewhere out in the dark. But it didn't quite match. The sound wasn't random. It had a pattern, steady and deliberate. It didn't stop, not for a long time. Eventually, I fell asleep. I woke up suddenly, heart pounding, unsure of what had pulled me from sleep. The cabin was silent, but the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. Felt like something was waiting. I stayed still, listening. The fire was out completely, leaving the room colder than before. The air felt heavier. Then I heard it again, that same steady thudding. Closer now, not from outside, from inside. I sat up slowly, barely breathing. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, the outlines of furniture barely visible in the faint moonlight filtering through the window. The sound was coming from the other side of the room, the table. Something was tapping against the wood, slow and deliberate. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached for the flashlight, fingers shaking as I clicked it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on the table. Nothing there. The sound stopped. I swept the flashlight across the room. The shelves, the stove, the door. Everything was where it should be, but the feeling hadn't gone away. I wasn't alone. I knew it. I forced myself to breathe, gripping the handle of the knife as I sat there, straining to hear anything else. The silence stretched on. Minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I lay back down, keeping the knife close. The next morning, everything felt normal again. Sunlight streamed through the window. The air smelled fresh. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it, that it had been nothing more than a dream. But then I saw them. On the table where the tapping had come from were marks, small, deliberate scratches in the wood, for lines parallel like something had dragged across the surface. My stomach twisted. I ran my fingers over them, feeling how deep they were. Not old, not weathered, fresh. I packed my things. Fast. I didn't care that I was supposed to stay until Sunday. I didn't care that leaving early meant admitting I was scared. I just knew I wasn't staying another night. As I locked the cabin door behind me, I heard it one last time. The steady, deliberate thudding, coming from inside the cabin. The GPS had glitched about 20 miles back, rerouting me onto a narrow, winding road that cut through dense forest. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches scraping against the sides of my car like skeletal fingers. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the rain had started coming down hard, turning the dirt road into a slick, muddy mess. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. The clock on the dashboard read 11:37 p.m. I was exhausted, my eyes straining to stay open. I just needed to get home, but the road kept twisting, leading me deeper into the woods with no sign of civilization. Then the engine sputtered. A sharp, metallic groan came from under the hood, and the car jerked forward before losing power completely. I slammed my foot on the brakes, skidding slightly in the mud before coming to a stop. The dashboard lights flickered, then died. Silence. I sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drumming against the roof. My breath fogged up the windshield. I turned the key in the ignition, nothing. Not even a click. Shit. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course. I leaned back, rubbing my face. The woods outside were pitch black, the kind of darkness that felt heavy, suffocating. The rain made it worse, distorting shapes, turning every shadow into something moving. I needed shelter. I grabbed my jacket, pulled the hood up, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit me immediately, rainwater soaking through my shoes. I popped the trunk and rummaged for a flashlight. The beam was weak, flickering, but it was better than nothing. I started walking. The road was useless. No cars had passed in hours. Maybe none ever did. My only hope was finding a house, a gas station, anything. After about 20 minutes of trudging through the mud, I saw it. A cabin. It was small, old, the wood weathered and dark. The roof sagged slightly, and the windows were black, reflecting nothing. A rusted metal chimney stuck out from the side, but no smoke came from it. The place looked abandoned. I hesitated. Something about it felt wrong. The way it sat there, tucked between the trees like it was hiding. But the rain was coming down harder now, and I was freezing. I walked up the creaking porch steps. The door was slightly ajar. Pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Damp wood, mildew, and something else. Something metallic. The flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing a single room with a dusty couch, a wooden table, and a fireplace. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped inside. I shut the door behind me, but it didn't latch properly, swinging open an inch. I ignored it. The place was cold, colder than outside. My breath came out in quick, visible puffs. I moved toward the fireplace, hoping to find dry wood. There were a few logs stacked beside it, but they were damp, useless. Then I saw the blood. A dark smear on the floor, leading toward a hallway at the back of the cabin. My stomach tightened. I shouldn't be here, but the storm was too loud now, the wind howling like something alive. I wasn't going back out there. I followed the blood. The hallway was narrow, the walls pressing in. The beam of my flashlight shook as I moved forward. At the end was a door slightly open. Pushed it. The room was empty except for a mattress on the floor. And on that mattress was a man. He was dead. His throat was slit, his eyes wide, staring at nothing. The blood was fresh, still glistening. My heart hammered in my chest. Someone had killed him. Recently. I backed away, my pulse roaring in my ears. I needed to leave. Now, then I heard it. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned just in time to see the axe coming down. The pain was instant, white-hot, blinding. I stumbled, my vision swimming. The axe had caught me in the shoulder, biting deep. Blood poured down my arm, hot and sticky. I didn't see his face, just a shadow, tall, moving fast. I ran. Out of the room, down the hall, my legs barely holding me. The front door was still open. I crashed through it, falling onto the porch. The rain soaked me instantly, mixing with the blood. I didn't stop. I sprinted into the woods, branches whipping at my face. My shoulder burned, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I heard footsteps, heavy, fast. He was coming. I didn't look back. I just ran, my lungs on fire, my legs numb. The trees blurred together. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Then lights. A a real one with asphalt and streetlights. A truck roared past, its headlights cutting through the rain. I screamed, waving my arms. It didn't stop, but another car was coming. I stumbled into the road, my vision darkening at the edges. The car screeched to a halt, the driver's door flying open. Jesus Christ! A man's voice, hands grabbing me. What the hell happened to you? I tried to speak, but my knees gave out. The last thing I saw was the woods behind me, the trees swaying in the storm, and a shadow watching from the darkness. I woke up in a hospital. The police came. They asked questions. I told them everything. They found the cabin, the body, but they never found the man with the axe. I still see him sometimes in my dreams, standing at the edge of the woods, just watching, waiting. The road ended miles back. Now, all that stretched ahead was a narrow dirt path, barely visible under the thick overgrowth of the forest. My car groaned as it rolled over roots and rocks, the suspension protesting every bump. The GPS had stopped working an hour ago, leaving me with nothing but a scribbled set of directions from the rental guy. Asterisk, follow the old logging trail till you see the red markers. Cabin's about half a mile in from there. Asterisk, I wasn't even sure why I'd chosen this place. Maybe because it was cheap. Maybe because I wanted to be alone. The city had been too loud, too crowded. I needed silence. The first red marker was a strip of faded cloth tied around a tree. The second was a rusted tin can nailed to a trunk. The deeper I went, the more the trees closed in, their branches scraping against the sides of the car like skeletal fingers. The air smelled damp, thick with the scent of rotting leaves and wet earth. Then suddenly the trees opened up. The cabin sat in a small clearing, its wooden walls dark with age. The roof sagged in the middle, and the porch steps were warped, the wood splintered and soft in places. A single window beside the door reflected the gray sky, the glass so grimy it looked almost black. I killed the engine. The silence rushed in, heavy and complete. No birds, no wind, just the creak of the cabin settling. The key was under a rock near the steps, just like the rental guy had said. It was cold in my hand, the metal rough with rust. The lock stuck at first, but after a few hard jiggles, it gave with a loud click. The door swung inward, releasing a stale, musty smell, old wood, dust, and something faintly sour underneath. Inside, the cabin was one main room with a tiny kitchenette in the corner. A wood stove sat against one wall, its pipe running up through the ceiling. A table with two chairs, a couch with faded upholstery. A door at the back led to what I assumed was the bedroom. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped inside. I dropped my bag on the table and walked to the window, wiping away some of the grime with my sleeve. The trees outside stood still, their trunks dark and wet from recent rain. No movement, no sound. I told myself it was peaceful. Night came fast. The woods swallowed the last of the daylight, and soon the only light came from the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. It flickered sometimes like the wiring was bad. I started a fire in the stove, but the heat didn't reach far. The air near the walls stayed cold. I sat on the couch, listening. The fire crackled. The wind had picked up outside, whispering through the trees. Every now and then, a branch tapped against the roof. Then a different sound, a soft scratch, like something dragging over wood. I held my breath. Came again. Not from the roof, from the wall near the bedroom. I stood slowly, my muscles tense. The sound stopped. Maybe it was an animal, a raccoon or a possum. They climbed. They scratched. I forced myself to sit back down. The fire burned lower. The shadows stretched longer. Then thump star. A single, heavy knock against the side of the cabin. My head snapped toward the sound. Nothing moved. The wind kept blowing. The branch kept tapping. I waited. Nothing else. I told myself it was the trees. The cold making the wood contract. Old cabins made noise, but my skin prickled. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and walked to the window. The beam cut through the glass, sweeping over the clearing. Empty, just trees and darkness. Then movement. Something shifted near the edge of the woods. Fast, just a flicker at the corner of my vision. I jerked the light toward it. Nothing. My breath fogged the glass. I wiped it away, straining to see. Nothing moved. I stood there for a long time, watching. Nothing. Finally, I turned away. I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, jerked me awake. The bedroom was small, the mattress thin and lumpy. The blankets smelled like mothballs. At some point, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was awake again. But this time, something was wrong. The air felt different, thicker. I lay still, listening. A sound. Breathing. Not mine. Slow. Deliberate. Right outside the bedroom door. My heart hammered. I didn't move. Didn't blink. The doorknob turned. Just slightly. Just enough to hear the mechanism click. Then nothing. The breathing stopped. I didn't move for what felt like hours. When I finally forced myself to get up, the cabin was empty. The front door was still locked. The windows shut. But on the floor near the bedroom door, a single muddy footprint. Not mine. I didn't stay. I packed my things fast, hands shaking. The sun was just coming up, pale light filtering through the trees. The car started on the first try. I didn't look back as I drove, the tires spitting mud behind me. The rental guy was surprised to see me so soon. Asterisk, you leaving already? Asterisk. I didn't tell him about the breathing, the footprint. I just handed him the key. Asterisk, yeah. Place wasn't for me. Asterisk. He shrugged, took the key. Asterisk, suit yourself. Asterisk. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The woods stood silent, watching. The road was supposed to save me time. A narrow dirt path cutting through the woods, shaving an hour off my trip back home. But the moment my tires left the smooth asphalt and hit the uneven, muddy trail, I knew I'd made a mistake. The trees closed in around me, their branches scraping against the sides of my car like skeletal fingers. The GPS had lost signal miles back, and now I was driving blind, guided only by the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the thick fog. I told myself it was fine, just a little farther, and I'd reconnect with the main road. But the deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to shift, the path twisting in ways I didn't remember. My hands tightened on the wheel, my knuckles white. The air inside the car felt heavy, stale. I rolled the window down, hoping the cold night air would clear my head, but all I got was the damp, rotting smell of wet leaves and earth. Then I saw it, a cabin. It stood just off the path, half hidden by the trees, its wooden walls warped and blackened with age. The roof sagged in the middle, as if something heavy had pressed down on it for years. The windows were dark, the glass broken in places, jagged teeth jutting from the frames. I slowed the car, staring at it. I hadn't seen any signs of civilization for miles. No houses, no lights, nothing. This place shouldn't have been here. I told myself to keep driving, but something about it pulled at me, a stupid, childish curiosity. Maybe it was the way the fog curled around it, making it look like it was breathing. Maybe it was the silence. No crickets, no owls, just the low hum of my engine and the creak of old wood. Before I knew what I was doing, I pulled over and killed the engine. The silence was immediate, oppressive. I sat there for a moment, listening to the rapid thud of my own heart. What was I doing? This was how people in horror movies died. But I wasn't in a movie. This was real. And real cabins in the woods didn't have ghosts or monsters. They had squatters, or animals, or nothing at all. I grabbed my phone, no signal, just like before, and stepped out of the car. The cold hit me first, seeping through my jacket like icy water. The ground was soft under my boots, the mud sucking at my soles with every step. I moved slowly, my breath fogging in front of me, my eyes locked on the cabin. The closer I got, the worse it looked. The wood was rotted, the porch steps bowed under invisible weight. The front door hung slightly open, swaying just a little in the wind. I hesitated at the bottom of the steps. This was stupid. I should turn around, get back in my car, and drive until I found a real road. But something kept me there. A sound, a scrape, like something dragging across the floor inside. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Could have been the wind, or an animal, but it had sounded too deliberate, too heavy. I took a step back. Then the door creaked open wider. I didn't wait to see what was inside. I turned and ran, my boots slipping in the mud, my pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I just focused on my car, on the door handle, on getting the hell out of there. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life. I didn't even check the mirrors. I just hit the gas, the tires spinning in the mud before catching and launching me forward. I didn't stop until the trees thinned and the road turned back to pavement. I never told anyone about the cabin. No one would have believed me anyway, and maybe there was nothing to believe. Maybe it was just an old, abandoned shack, and the sound was just the wind. But sometimes when I'm driving at night, when the fog rolls in and the trees press too close, I think about that door swinging open. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed long enough to see what was on the other side. The cabin sat deep in the woods, miles from the nearest road. It wasn't some picturesque, cozy getaway. It was old, leaning slightly to one side, the wood grayed from years of exposure. The windows were smeared with dirt, and the roof sagged in places where moisture had rotted the shingles. It belonged to my uncle, a man I had never been close with. When he passed, it fell to me. I didn't even know he had a cabin until the lawyer contacted me. I didn't want it, but selling it meant clearing it out, and that meant at least one trip up there. I made the drive in late October. The trees had already lost most of their leaves, and the sky was the dull gray of early winter. It had been raining off and on, leaving the road slick and the air damp. The gravel road leading up to the cabin was barely more than a path, overgrown and rutted from years of neglect. My truck groaned as I eased it up the hill, branches scraping the sides, tires kicking up mud. When I finally pulled into the clearing, I sat there for a long minute, engine idling, staring at the cabin. It looked worse up close. The porch steps had warped, one of them cracked completely in half. The door leaned slightly on its hinges. I had a bad feeling before I even stepped inside. It wasn't fear, exactly, just a heavy unease, like the air was pressing down on me. I chalked it up to being alone in a strange place. The inside was musty, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and old dust. The furniture was sparse, just a sagging couch, a wooden table, a single chair. There was a fireplace, though it looked like it hadn't been used in years. I found the fuse box and managed to get the power on. A single bulb flickered to life in the kitchen, casting long, unsteady shadows. I had planned to spend one night there, just enough time to take inventory of what needed to be hauled out. I set up my sleeping bag in the one bedroom, put a flashlight next to my pillow just in case. I wasn't scared, just cautious. The first sign that something was off came just after dark. The wind had picked up, rattling the trees outside, making the walls creak. I heard something out on the porch, just a single heavy step. I froze, listening. Nothing. Probably just an animal. I convinced myself of that until I heard it again. A slow, deliberate footstep. I grabbed the flashlight and moved to the window, angling it toward the porch. The beam cut through the dark, revealing empty space. I stepped back, shutting the curtain. Just the wind, I told myself. Just the old wood shifting. I sat at the table, flipping through a notebook I had found in a drawer, something my uncle had left behind. It was filled with scattered notes, barely legible, written in short, clipped sentences. Most of it made no sense, lists of numbers, strange observations about the weather. But one line caught my attention. If you hear it, don't open the door. A chill ran up my spine. I snapped the book shut and pushed it away. Just ramblings, I told myself. The mutterings of an old man who had lived too long in isolation. I decided to turn in early. The sooner I slept, the sooner I could leave in the morning. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was awake again, heart hammering, ears straining. Something had woken me. I reached for the flashlight, clicking it on. The room was empty, just the same peeling wallpaper, the same sagging bed frame. But I felt it. Something was wrong. Then I heard it again. Not on the porch this time, but inside. A faint creak of wood, like a footstep on an old floor. My stomach clenched. I held my breath, listening. Another step. Slow. Measured. I wanted to believe it was my mind playing tricks on me, but I couldn't ignore the sound. I sat up, moving as quietly as I could. The flashlight shook in my grip. I eased the bedroom door open just enough to peek through. The living room was dark, the shadows stretching long. The front door was still shut. No windows were broken, but I knew, deep in my gut, that I wasn't alone. I felt it, a presence just beyond my vision. Then I saw it. The chair, the single wooden chair at the table, it had moved. It was now facing the bedroom door. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. The air felt thick, pressing in around me. I could hear my own heartbeat, a rapid thudding in my ears. I forced myself to take a breath, slow and controlled. Then, carefully, I reached for my bag. I moved deliberately, never turning my back on the room. I didn't bother packing anything. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and I left. The moment I stepped onto the porch, the air felt lighter, less suffocating. I didn't stop moving until I was in my truck, engine roaring to life. I didn't look back as I drove away. I didn't stop until I was miles down the road, until the cabin was nothing but a bad memory. I never went back. I put the place up for sale, no questions asked. Someone else bought it, someone who probably didn't believe in the things I had felt. But I knew better. Sometimes I still dream about it. The sound of those slow, deliberate footsteps, the way the air felt heavy in that house. And I wonder, late at night, if someone else is sitting in that cabin right now, staring at a chair that wasn't where they left it. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. My friend Mark had found an old, secluded cabin up in the mountains, far enough from the hustle and bustle of everyday life that we could just relax and unwind. We were both pretty worn out from work and life, and the thought of disconnecting for a couple of days sounded perfect. We packed our bags, grabbed some supplies, and set off on a Friday afternoon. The drive up to the cabin took longer than expected. We had to follow winding roads through thick woods, the kind where the trees were so close they almost seemed to be watching us. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows, but there was still enough light to see where we were going. Mark was driving, while I sat quietly in the passenger seat, half listening to the radio and half lost in my own thoughts. The air was crisp, the kind of mountain air that makes you feel awake, even though you're tired. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was nearly gone, leaving the sky a deep purple. The cabin was small, nestled between towering pines, with a stone chimney puffing out a little smoke. It looked cozy from the outside, but there was something about it that felt off. I couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was the way the trees surrounded it, blocking out the rest of the world. Or maybe it was the silence. There was no sound of animals, no rustling of leaves, just stillness. Mark shrugged off any concerns and said, "It'll be fine. Let's just get inside and get settled." The inside was exactly what I had expected. Rustic, with dark wood paneling, a small kitchen area, and a stone fireplace. There were 2 bedrooms, one for each of us, and a large window in the living room that overlooked the woods. The place was a little older than I thought, but it had a certain charm to it. There was no Wi-Fi, no phone signal, no distractions. Just us, the cabin, and the trees. We spent the evening unpacking and setting up a fire in the fireplace. The warmth from the flames made the cabin feel a little less cold, and we settled in for a night of games and beers. I had a weird feeling, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was just the unfamiliar surroundings. Mark didn't seem bothered at all, laughing and joking like he always did. As the night went on, we both started to feel more at ease. But that's when things started getting weird. It started with the tapping sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe a branch hitting the side of the cabin. But then it happened again. A soft tapping, like someone or something was lightly knocking on the walls. I glanced at Mark, who didn't seem to notice. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice low. "Hear what?" he replied, taking a swig of his beer. "The tapping," I said, a little unnerved now. "It sounds like something is tapping on the walls." Mark just shrugged. "It's probably just the wind. Don't get freaked out, man." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The tapping continued intermittently, and every time it happened, I felt my skin crawl a little. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the trees. It was something else. I tried to ignore it, but it wasn't easy. By the time we went to bed, the tapping had stopped. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of the cabin, every little sound, made me jerk awake. At one point, I even thought I heard footsteps on the porch, but when I checked, there was nothing there, just the empty darkness of the woods. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. Mark had already gotten up, and he was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee and scrolling through his phone. There was still no signal, though, so I wasn't sure how he was able to use it. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked, looking up from his phone. I rubbed my eyes and nodded. "I guess. A little restless, though. Did you hear anything weird last night?" Mark didn't seem concerned. "Like what? Like tapping on the walls?" He chuckled. "Man, you're overthinking things. It's just an old cabin. It makes noises." But I wasn't convinced. There was something off about this place. It was too quiet, too still. The kind of quiet that makes your mind start playing tricks on you. I didn't say anything more, though. I didn't want to sound crazy. We spent the rest of the morning hiking around the area, trying to clear our heads. The woods were dense, with a thick carpet of pine needles underfoot. The further we walked, the more I felt like we were being watched. It was the same feeling I'd had back at the cabin, but worse. My neck prickled, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, but every time I turned, there was nothing there. We stopped for lunch by a small stream, and I was starting to feel a little better, a little more relaxed. Maybe I was just imagining things. I thought, maybe it was just the isolation getting to me. But when we got back to the cabin, the weirdness started again. The door was slightly ajar. I was sure we had closed it before leaving. I remember Mark pushing it closed when we left, making sure it latched. But now it was open, just a crack, as if someone or something had been inside. "Did you leave the door open?" I asked, my voice tight. Mark looked confused. "No, I made sure it was locked." We both stood there for a moment, staring at the door. Neither of us made a move to open it. "Maybe it's just the wind," Mark said after a long pause. "The door's old. It could have just shifted or something." But I didn't believe that. I couldn't explain why, but I felt like something was wrong. Very wrong. We went inside, and as soon as we stepped in, the temperature dropped. It wasn't a gradual change. It felt like we'd walked into an entirely different room. The warmth of the fire was gone. I shivered. The cabin felt off. The air was thick with something I couldn't place. We checked the windows and the other doors, but everything seemed fine. Nothing was out of place, but the feeling didn't go away. That night, I decided to stay up. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I couldn't relax, not with the strange noises and the door being open. I sat by the fire, listening to the silence. Mark had gone to bed early, and I was alone. Then the tapping started again. Soft, almost rhythmic. It was coming from the walls, but this time it wasn't just on one side. It was all around me. I could hear it above my head, behind me, beside me. My heart started pounding in my chest. I tried to ignore it, but it only grew louder. I stood up, my legs shaking. I grabbed the flashlight from the table and slowly walked toward the sound. The tapping continued, faster now, like something was desperate to get my attention. I reached the wall, shining the beam of light across it, expecting to see something, but there was nothing. That's when I heard it, a scraping sound. It came from the floorboards beneath me, as if something was trying to crawl through them. My stomach dropped. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, like I was trapped in place. Then I heard a low growl. It was faint at first, like a whisper, but it grew louder and more guttural, coming from somewhere beneath the cabin. I dropped the flashlight, and it rolled away, leaving me in the dark. My breath came in short gasps as I fumbled around, trying to find it. But the growling didn't stop. It was getting closer, and I knew I had to leave. Now, I ran to the door, my heart racing, and threw it open. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I ran straight into the woods, not caring where I was going, not caring if I ran into something worse. I just needed to get away. I didn't stop running until I reached the road. By then, my legs were burning, and I was gasping for air. I looked back toward the cabin, but it was gone. It was like it had disappeared into the darkness, like it was never there at all. I stayed there for hours, too scared to go back. Eventually, Mark found me. He didn't understand why I was so shaken, but I didn't care. I wasn't going back to that cabin. It was like the place had something wrong with it, something that I couldn't explain. We left the mountains the next morning. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I never went camping again after that. And I never went back to that cabin either. I had never been one for cabins, or the woods for that matter. I'd always thought they were for people who wanted to get away from it all. But for me, the idea of being isolated in some remote area with no one around for miles just didn't seem all that appealing. Yet, here I was, driving down an old, cracked highway, the trees surrounding me like dark, heavy walls. The kind of trees you see in movies, the ones that seem to reach for the sky and block out the light. I wasn't alone, though. My cousin, Ben, was with me. Ben was the type who liked to push me out of my comfort zone. He'd been talking about this cabin trip for months, a weekend getaway in the middle of nowhere. He said it would be peaceful, a way to clear our heads. Maybe he was right, but as I glanced at the forest, I wasn't sure I was buying it. The road turned narrower the deeper we went, the pavement worn and uneven. Trees crowded the edges, their branches stretching over us like skeletal hands, casting strange, sharp shadows on the car's headlights. It felt like we were getting farther and farther from civilization with every mile. Almost there, Ben said, breaking the silence. I know this place looks a little desolate, but it's nice once we get settled in. I nodded, but I wasn't sure if I believed him. The thought of being completely cut off from everything didn't sit well with me. I'd never been good with quiet, not like Ben, who thrived on it. Me, I preferred the noise, the hum of life, the comfort of knowing someone was close by. A cabin in the woods just felt like an invitation to be swallowed up. We finally turned onto a smaller gravel road. The car bumped and swayed as the tires kicked up dust and small stones. The trees thinned out a little, revealing a small clearing where the cabin stood. It was old, with weathered wood and a sagging porch, but still, it looked like it could be cozy, if nothing else. Ben seemed pleased. "See," he said, his voice a little too cheerful. "This place is perfect." I wasn't so sure, but I forced a smile. "Yeah, it's nice." We pulled up and parked. The night was falling fast, and I could already hear the crickets and the distant rustle of leaves. The cabin seemed to be holding onto a kind of stillness, like it had been waiting for someone to arrive. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Ben hopped out of the car, grabbing the bags from the trunk, and I reluctantly followed him. The air was cold, fresh, the kind of cold that made you pull your jacket a little tighter. The sky was dark, with only a few scattered stars visible through the thick branches overhead. I could hear the wind rustling in the trees, a sound that was both calming and eerie at the same time. Inside, the cabin was just as old as the outside, maybe older. The floor creaked beneath my feet, and the air smelled like old wood and something else, something faintly musty. It didn't help that the place felt like it had been abandoned for a while. The furniture was old, mismatched, and there were signs of wear everywhere, like nobody had bothered to take care of it in years. Ben dropped his bags on the couch and immediately started unpacking. "I'll get the fire going. You set up the kitchen?" he asked, already rummaging through the firewood stack. I nodded. Setting up the kitchen was easy enough. The cabinets creaked open to reveal rusty pans and chipped plates. There was a small, outdated stove in the corner, and a wood-burning stove that looked like it hadn't been used in ages. Still, I wasn't going to complain. I come along for the trip, and now I just needed to get through the weekend. While Ben worked on the fire, I pulled out the food and set up a small table in the center of the room. The light from the fire flickered on the walls, casting long, dancing shadows. For a moment, it felt peaceful, the kind of quiet I could get used to, but that didn't last long. The wind outside picked up, howling through the trees. I paused, listening to it. There was something about the sound that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the usual comforting wind. This one sounded almost desperate, like the trees were screaming. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ben didn't seem to hear me. He was too focused on the fire, throwing a few more logs on it. The flames crackled, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The cabin felt warmer now, but the unease in my chest didn't go away. "Come on, it's just the wind," Ben said with a shrug. "You've got to stop overthinking everything." I wanted to argue, but something about the place was making my skin crawl. The stillness of it, the feeling that we were the only two people for miles, was starting to wear on me. I had a vague sense of dread, like something was watching us, but I couldn't place it. As the night went on, the wind didn't die down. It grew stronger, the trees outside creaking and groaning in the gusts. It felt like the cabin was shifting with every gust, like it was alive. I couldn't help but keep glancing at the windows, half expecting to see something or someone peering in. Ben, on the other hand, was as relaxed as ever. He had a beer in hand and was sprawled out in front of the fire, watching it with a kind of hypnotic fascination. I envied him a little, but I was still on edge. Around midnight, I started hearing noises that didn't belong. Small creaks, footsteps on the porch, a tapping on the window. I thought it was just my imagination, but it kept happening. It wasn't the wind anymore. The noise was too deliberate. I stood up from my seat and moved quietly to the window, peering out into the dark yard. Nothing. But then a shadow moved. It was quick, just a blur, and it disappeared behind a tree. I blinked, unsure of what I'd seen. My heart pounded harder, and my hands started to shake. I backed away from the window and quickly returned to the living room. "Ben," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "there's someone outside." Ben didn't even look up. "Probably just some animals, man. You're freaking yourself out." I didn't know what to say. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. The noise was too real, too close. My body was on high alert, and every little sound made my pulse spike. The wind was howling louder now, rattling the windows, and the trees outside seemed to be moving in strange patterns. Something was off. "Ben, I'm serious," I pressed. "I heard something. Someone's out there." This time, Ben finally looked up, his expression changing. All right, I'll go check it out." He grabbed a flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. I stood by the door, waiting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I heard Ben's voice muttering to himself, something about how it was probably just an animal. But then, everything went quiet, too quiet. I opened the door, stepping out onto the porch, my heart pounding in my chest. Ben was nowhere to be seen. I called his name, but my voice was swallowed by the wind. I waited for what felt like an eternity, and then, footsteps, Ben's heavy boots on the gravel. But when I turned, it wasn't Ben standing there. It was a man, tall, thin, with an eerie smile on his face, standing in the shadows of the porch. My blood ran cold. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice low, but shaking. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, watching me, his grin growing wider, more unsettling. I felt trapped. The door to the cabin was behind me, but something told me I couldn't go back in. Not with him there. I started to back away, my heart thudding in my ears, when suddenly, Ben's voice shouted from the other side of the cabin. "What the hell are you doing out here?" I didn't wait. I turned and bolted for the door. When I stepped inside, I slammed it shut behind me, my breath coming in short, frantic bursts. Ben rushed inside a moment later. What happened? Who was that? I looked at him, my mind racing. I don't know, but we need to leave. Now. He didn't argue. We grabbed our things and ran for the car, my heart racing the whole way. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that man following us. We didn't look back as we sped down the gravel road, the lights of the cabin fading into the distance. We drove for miles before I dared to let out a breath. But even then, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It followed me home, lingering in the back of my mind like a shadow. I never went back to that cabin. I don't even know how to start this. I don't want to write it down because writing it down makes it real. But I can't stop thinking about it, and I haven't slept more than a couple of hours a night since it happened. Maybe this will help. Maybe putting it out there will let me move on. It started with a trip, a cabin in the woods, just for a few days. I needed the break. Work had been killing me, stress piling up, the same endless cycle of exhaustion and frustration. The idea of getting away, even just for a little while, sounded like exactly what I needed. I found a listing online, small, isolated, no Wi-Fi, just a wood-burning stove and a couple of rooms. The pictures made it look perfect. I booked it for 5 days. The drive was long. The roads twisted through miles of dense trees, the kind that swallowed all sound and made the world feel smaller. The farther I went, the less I saw of civilization. No houses, no gas stations, just trees pressing in from both sides. By the time I arrived, the sun was starting to set, bleeding through the branches in streaks of orange and red. The cabin sat at the end of a narrow dirt path, a small structure with a sagging porch and a single window facing the driveway. It looked older than I expected, worn down by years of harsh weather, but still solid. I parked, got out, stretched my legs. The air was crisp, cold in a way that cut straight through my jacket. I grabbed my bag, locked the car, and went to the door. The key was under a rock beside the step, just like the owner had said. I let myself in, shutting the door behind me. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood and dust, old but not unpleasant. A fireplace sat in the main room, a small kitchen in the back, a single hallway leading to a bedroom and a bathroom. Simple, exactly what I wanted. I dropped my bag on the couch and walked through, checking everything out. The place was clean, but there was something off about it. Maybe it was just the quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring, that makes every little sound feel louder than it should. I shrugged it off. I was alone in the woods. That was the whole point. The first night was fine. I built a fire, cooked a simple dinner, read for a while. The only sounds were the crackling of the wood and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. When I finally went to bed, I slept deeply, exhaustion from the long drive knocking me out completely. The second night, I woke up around 2 a.m. with the kind of jolt that makes your heart race before you even understand why. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. The fire had burned down and the room was cold. The only sound was the wind outside, rattling the trees. Then I heard it, a soft scraping like something dragging across wood. Not inside, outside. I held my breath, listening. Came again. A slow, deliberate scrape against the porch. My first thought was an animal, a raccoon, maybe a coyote, but something about it felt wrong. Too steady, too intentional. I sat up slowly, trying not to make a sound. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I reached for my phone, but there was no service, no way to call for help if I needed it. I cursed under my breath and got out of bed as quietly as I could. The floorboards creaked beneath me. I winced and stopped, listening. Silence. I moved to the window, pressing my back against the wall beside it. Carefully, I leaned forward just enough to peek outside. Nothing. The porch was empty, just darkness stretching between the trees. I stood there for a long time, waiting, watching. After a while, I started to feel stupid. It was late, I was in an unfamiliar place, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I went back to bed, telling myself it was nothing. The third night, I locked the door, checked the windows twice, and set a fire burning before I went to bed. I told myself I wasn't scared. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then, around midnight, I woke up again. First, I didn't know why. Then I realized it was because the fire was out. Completely, like someone had put it out with water. The room was freezing. My breath came out in white puffs. I sat up slowly, every nerve in my body on edge. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. The door was open, not just unlocked. Open, wide enough that the cold air was pouring in, making the curtains shift and billow. I stared at it, my brain struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. I had locked that door. I was sure of it. I forced myself to move, stepping carefully onto the wooden floor. Creaked under my weight. I walked to the door and peered out. The night was thick with darkness, the trees swaying in the wind. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I slammed the door shut and locked it again, sliding the deadbolt into place. My hands were shaking. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The fourth night, I sat by the fire with a knife in my hand. I hadn't seen anyone. I hadn't heard anyone. But I knew, deep in my gut, that I wasn't alone. Someone was out there. Someone had been inside my cabin. I checked every window, every corner, every shadow. Nothing, but the feeling never left. I stayed up, waiting, listening. At 3:12 a.m., the sound came again. Scraping, slow, deliberate, then a soft creak, like a footstep on the porch. I gripped the knife tighter, my pulse hammering in my throat. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Another creak, closer this time. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to get in my car and go. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I ran, I wouldn't know who or what I was running from. I forced myself to move, inching toward the window. Slowly, carefully, I looked outside. There was nothing, just darkness and trees. Then I saw it, the faintest shift of movement near the tree line. A figure barely visible in the weak moonlight. Tall, still, watching. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and bolted for the car. The moment I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a wall, the wind slicing through my clothes. I ran, not daring to look back. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the lock. Finally, the door opened. I jumped inside, slammed it shut, and locked it. My headlights cut through the darkness. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the dirt. As I turned onto the road, I risked one last glance at the cabin. The porch was empty, but in the distance, just beyond the reach of my headlights, something stood between the trees. Watching, I didn't stop. I didn't breathe until I hit the main road, miles away from that place. I don't know who it was. I don't know what they wanted. I don't want to know, but I'll never go back. I've never been one for the outdoors. I like my comfort, my familiar surroundings, and my routines. But when I was offered the chance to rent a secluded cabin for a weekend, I thought it could be an interesting change of pace. It wasn't exactly far from civilization, but the cabin was tucked away in a forest, far from the nearest neighbor, and I figured it would be a peaceful place to unwind. No phone service, no Wi-Fi, just the quiet of nature. The place was cheap, too cheap. I had a few reservations, but with the promise of isolation, I pushed those aside. I packed a bag with clothes, food, and books, and made the 2-hour drive alone. The road was winding, lined with trees that grew thick as they crowded each other, casting shadows over the narrow asphalt. The closer I got to the cabin, the less familiar the area became. I didn't like how everything felt off balance, but that was probably just me being paranoid. The GPS stopped working right before I reached the cabin, but I wasn't too concerned. I had the address written down. I turned off the main road and onto a smaller dirt path. The car bumped and jolted as it trundled along, the trees narrowing the space until it felt like I was driving through a tunnel. At first, the cabin was exactly what I'd expected. It was small, rustic, and looked like something straight out of a brochure, just enough for one person to feel cozy but not crowded. I parked in the dirt lot near the door and got out, stretching my legs. The air was still and cool, and the trees stood tall around me like silent guardians. There was something unnerving about the quiet, like it was waiting for something to happen. The cabin itself had an odd, neglected look to it, but that was probably just from years of exposure to the elements. It didn't seem dangerous, just strange. The door creaked open as I turned the knob, and the smell of dust and old wood hit me. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the empty room. The cabin was simple, an open space with a small kitchen area, a wood stove in the corner, and a couch facing a large stone fireplace. The furniture was worn but serviceable. Nothing special, but that's what I had expected. The windows were large, giving a clear view of the forest around the cabin, and there was a small porch with 2 rocking chairs that I could imagine sitting in while reading a book. After unloading my things, I set about making myself at home. I made a fire in the stove and cooked up some dinner. The crackling of the flames and the scent of food filled the cabin, making it feel a little less lonely. As the night drew on, I found myself getting sleepy, and I decided to go to bed early. The silence outside felt heavy, as if the woods were watching, waiting for something. But I was tired, and I had come to get some rest. I didn't expect to sleep well, and I didn't. The mattress was firm, too firm, but I managed to fall asleep after a while. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something had changed. The room felt different, like there was a presence in the air. I chalked it up to the isolation, the strange surroundings messing with my mind. But as I lay there in the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind rustling the trees outside, but the longer I listened, the less convincing that sounded. There was a sound, a faint scraping noise, coming from somewhere in the cabin. I sat up slowly, straining to hear. It was soft, almost imperceptible, like fingernails on wood. My breath hitched in my throat. I told myself it was nothing, just an animal outside or the house settling. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I reached for the flashlight beside my bed and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, and I scanned the room, my heart pounding. Nothing, but that wasn't enough. I had to check. I had to know. I slowly got out of bed, my feet hitting the cold wood floor. The scraping noise had stopped, but I felt like I was being watched. I grabbed the flashlight and walked to the door, trying not to make any noise. I opened it just a crack, peering into the empty hallway beyond. The cabin was small, so I wasn't too worried about running into anything, but the eerie sensation lingered. I walked to the kitchen and stood still for a moment, listening. The air was thick, almost oppressive. Then I heard it again. The sound came from somewhere deeper in the cabin. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. This time it was louder, sharper, like something scraping against metal. I slowly made my way down the hallway, flashlight in hand, and toward the back door that led out to the porch. The air in the hallway grew colder, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The door was ajar, just a crack, and the hinges creaked as the wind pushed against it. I shoved the door open and stepped outside onto the porch. The night air hit me like a slap to the face, cold and biting. I scanned the dark forest, the trees casting long, crooked shadows across the ground. There was nothing, no movement, no sound except the wind rustling through the branches. But something didn't feel right. The silence was too complete, too suffocating. I turned back to the cabin and froze. Standing in the doorway was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, with a long coat that seemed to blend into the night. My stomach turned, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching. I felt my heart skip a beat. My first instinct was to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. The wind howled, but the figure remained still. The longer I stared, the more I realized that there was no way this was a person. The shape was wrong, too tall, too thin, and it didn't seem to cast a shadow. It was like it was part of the darkness itself. Without thinking, I backed up, stumbling over the steps as I retreated into the cabin. My mind was racing. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I couldn't explain it, couldn't make sense of it. I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I just stood there, staring at the door, listening to the wind outside. The rest of the night was a blur. I didn't sleep, didn't dare close my eyes. The cabin felt smaller, more oppressive. The sense of being watched never left, and every creak of the wood, every whisper of the wind made my heart race. I stayed awake, clutching the flashlight, too afraid to move. The next morning, the sun rose, and everything seemed normal. The forest was quiet, the cabin still. I tried to brush off the events of the night, convincing myself that it had been a bad dream. But something about the place still felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had seen, or thought I had seen, was still there, lurking in the woods, waiting. I spent the rest of the day keeping to myself, reading, cooking, anything to distract myself from the nagging feeling in my chest. As nightfall approached again, I debated leaving. I wasn't sure if I could handle another night, but the thought of driving back through the dark, alone on the winding roads, didn't seem like much of an improvement. So I stayed. That night, the strange feeling returned, but nothing happened. No scraping sounds, no figures in the doorway. I managed to sleep, albeit fitfully, and the next morning, I packed up my things. I didn't want to stick around to find out what else might be lurking in the shadows. As I drove away from the cabin, the road winding its way back to civilization, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The cabin was just a speck in the distance, hidden among the trees. I didn't know what had happened that night. I didn't know if I had imagined it, if the isolation had gotten to me, or if there was something truly strange about that place. But one thing was certain: I would never go back. I never expected to be staying in a cabin alone. The whole idea seemed silly when I first agreed to it, but I was at a point in my life where I needed space. I needed to be away from everything. The noise, the constant chatter, the mundane distractions of city life, and the cabin, tucked away deep in the woods, seemed like the perfect escape. The cabin wasn't anything special. It was old, weathered, and looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint in years. But I didn't mind that. It was small, cozy even, with a fireplace in the center of the living room and a big porch that looked out over a small clearing. The place had character, an odd charm that made me feel comfortable, at least at first. There was no electricity, no Wi-Fi, no running water. Just an old well outside for water and a wood-burning stove to heat the place. It seemed like the perfect way to disconnect from everything. I drove out there alone, taking the long winding road that cut through dense forest. The weather was overcast, with heavy clouds hanging low in the sky. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but I brushed it off. I was just in my head too much, trying to escape the stress of everything. The drive was about 2 hours, and the road eventually got narrower and rockier the further I went. I had to stop at one point to check the map, unsure if I was still on the right path. But after a few more twists and turns, I finally saw the cabin in the distance, hidden behind a thick line of trees. When I parked, the silence was immediate and overwhelming. No birds, no wind, nothing. It was as if the entire world had shut off. I grabbed my backpack and walked up the creaky steps to the front door. I turned the old handle and stepped inside. The inside was exactly as I had imagined it, rustic and simple, with a large stone fireplace in the middle of the room and a few worn-out chairs scattered around. A small kitchen area with just the basics: an old gas stove, a sink, and a table with mismatched chairs. There was a small loft upstairs with a bed and a few windows that overlooked the clearing outside. The floorboards groaned under every step, and the air inside was thick with dust, as though no one had been here in a long time. But that was okay. It was what I needed. I spent the first few hours unpacking and organizing my things. The sun started to set, and I made a fire in the fireplace. The crackling of the logs was the only sound that filled the space, and it felt oddly comforting. I cooked some simple food on the stove and settled in with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. The isolation was exactly what I needed. For the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. But that night, something felt off. I woke up around midnight, suddenly aware of a strange noise. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. A soft thud, like something was tapping against the wall. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but then I heard it again, this time closer. The sound was unmistakable, like someone was gently knocking on the side of the cabin. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. I tried to shake it off. It was probably a branch from one of the trees outside, brushing against the wall. That was all. I told myself it wasn't anything to worry about, but the knocks continued, one after the other, rhythmic and slow. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone was out there playing a prank. I had been out of touch with the world for a while now, and maybe it was someone checking in on me. Or maybe it was just an animal. I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and crept down the stairs. The fire was still burning, casting an orange glow across the room. The sound was coming from the far side of the cabin, near the back wall. I pointed the beam of light around the room, expecting to see a branch swaying against the window. But nothing was there. The place was still. The knock stopped. I stood there in the dark, listening intently. Nothing. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and turned to go back upstairs. But then I heard it again. The faintest sound, like a footstep. I froze. I slowly turned toward the sound, shining the flashlight towards the corner. Nothing. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and I swear I could feel something watching me. My skin crawled as I slowly backed away, heading toward the stairs. I felt like I was on edge, like I was being pulled into some invisible force. The night stretched on in uneasy silence, and I finally managed to drift back to sleep, but not without waking up several more times, each time with a feeling of dread gnawing at my insides. When morning came, I was exhausted but tried to convince myself that it had all been my imagination. The knocks? Probably just the wind or an animal. The footsteps? Probably nothing more than the house settling. But the uneasy feeling lingered. The next day, I decided to explore the woods around the cabin. Maybe the fresh air would clear my head and help me shake the weird feeling. I walked for hours, taking in the quiet of the forest. The trees were tall and thick, their branches twisting and turning like old bones. It was eerie but beautiful in a way. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. There were no birds, no insects, nothing. The silence was oppressive, like the world had just stopped. I came across an old clearing, the ground covered in moss and fallen leaves. There was a dilapidated stone wall in the center, partially overgrown with ivy. It was strange. There was no sign of any buildings nearby, no indication that anyone had been here for years. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the stones. They were old, worn smooth by time. As I stood up, I noticed something odd. 2 rocks arranged in a small, neat pile at the base of the wall. They weren't natural. Someone had placed them there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched again. But there was no one, just the silent forest. I didn't stay long. I made my way back to the cabin as quickly as I could. The unsettling feeling from the night before had returned, stronger now. It was like a shadow that had followed me back. The next few days were filled with more of the same. An overwhelming sense of being watched, strange noises at night, and that constant feeling of dread. Couldn't shake it. I tried to stay busy, to keep my mind occupied, but the unease never left. One evening, I decided to leave early the next morning. I packed my things, determined to get out of there and head back to the city. But just as I was about to leave, I saw something outside the cabin, just beyond the clearing. A figure, a man. He was standing still, looking directly at the cabin. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out onto the porch, calling out to him. No response. I shone the light in his direction, but he was gone, vanished. I checked the perimeter of the cabin but found nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone. At that moment, I knew I had to leave. Something was wrong with that place. The cabin, the woods, the silence, it all felt wrong. I packed up and drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I never went back to that cabin. I didn't even bother to find out what it was that had been there. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the faint knocks on the wall, the soft footsteps in the dark, and I can still feel that eerie presence, watching me from the shadows. I don't know what was out there, or if I'll ever truly understand it. But one thing's for sure, some places are better left unexplored. Some places are meant to stay in the past. The cabin was supposed to be an escape. It was a last-minute decision, one that didn't seem like much of a decision at all. Just a weekend getaway, a chance to get away from everything. My friend had suggested it, and at the time, it sounded perfect. I needed the quiet. The noise of everyday life had become deafening. The constant pressure from work, the texts, the emails, the phone calls. All of it felt too much. So when the invitation to a secluded cabin popped up, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. The cabin was located deep in the woods. I'm not sure why I hadn't thought much about how isolated it really was until we drove further into the trees. I mean, it's not like I hadn't seen the photos, the rustic charm, the cozy atmosphere, but those photos didn't capture how eerily quiet it was once we stepped out of the car. The air was heavy with the scent of pine, and there was something about the place that didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of the wind or the far-off call of a bird. Maybe it was the fact that the cabin looked like it had been there for decades, the wood darkened by age, the windows small and barely letting any light in. It was as if the entire place had been forgotten by time. But I brushed it off. It was just a cabin in the woods, after all. There was no reason to be paranoid. I was there to relax, to get away from it all. Still, when I opened the front door, I couldn't help but feel a strange unease. The smell inside was musty, like old furniture and stale air. The floors creaked beneath my feet as I walked through the narrow hallway, the only light coming from a few dim bulbs that barely lit the corners of the room. I dropped my bags by the door and walked over to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains. The trees outside looked like they were closing in, their branches swaying in the wind, casting long shadows across the yard. There were no other houses nearby, no sign of civilization, just miles and miles of forest. After a few minutes, I heard my friend, Sam, call from the back of the cabin. I turned away from the window and walked toward his voice. The cabin's layout was small, with only a few rooms. Sam was in the kitchen, rummaging through the cabinets, already cracking open a beer. "I'm telling you, this place is perfect," he said, grinning. "Totally isolated, no distractions, just us and nature." I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced. There was something off about the place, but I didn't want to ruin the mood. Sam had been my best friend for years, and I knew he was just excited to get away. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. We spent the rest of the day unpacking and settling in. The cabin had a fireplace, and we managed to get a small fire going in the living room. As night fell, the shadows in the cabin grew deeper, and I found myself checking the locks on the doors more than once. The feeling of being watched was hard to shake. We made dinner, ate, and talked, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. It was subtle at first, but it slowly crept into every conversation, every moment. After dinner, we decided to go outside and sit on the porch for a while. The evening had grown cold, the air crisp with the onset of fall. Sam lit another cigarette, and we sat there in silence for a while, watching the night sky. The stars were bright, more than I had ever seen in the city. But there was something wrong about it, too. The night was so still, it felt almost unnatural. There was no wind, no sounds of animals, nothing. That was when I heard it. A faint sound in the distance, like a tapping or a light knocking. I turned my head, but I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. I thought maybe it was a branch tapping against the side of the cabin. But no, the noise was coming from somewhere farther out, deep in the forest. I looked at Sam, but he didn't seem to hear it. He was still staring at the sky, oblivious. I was about to say something when the sound stopped. I didn't mention it. I didn't want to seem paranoid. After all, it was probably just some animal or the wind. So we stayed outside for a while longer before heading back in. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing strange noises, creaks, like something was moving around in the cabin. But when I checked, the place was empty. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that I finally managed to drift off. The next day, Sam suggested we go for a hike. I agreed, mostly to shake off the uneasy feeling that had been growing in my chest. The woods around the cabin were dense and quiet, the path winding through trees and underbrush. It was beautiful in a way, but the feeling of being watched never left me. We walked for a couple of hours, the silence pressing in on us, until we came to a clearing. It was strange, an open space in the woods, but there was something odd about it. The trees around the clearing were unnaturally bent, like they had been twisted by some force. And the ground, it was covered in a thick, almost unnatural layer of moss, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. I felt a sudden urge to leave, but Sam seemed entranced by the place. He started walking toward the center of the clearing, his footsteps slow and deliberate. I called out to him, but he didn't answer. I had to follow. When I reached the center, I felt a wave of cold, as if the air had dropped a few degrees. I stood there for a moment, looking around, and that's when I saw it. A shape, a figure standing just at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the trees. It was too far to make out clearly, but I could feel its presence. I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I looked over at Sam. He was still staring off into the distance, unaware of the figure. Couldn't look away. It wasn't until I stepped closer to Sam that the figure vanished into the trees. We quickly made our way back to the cabin. Sam was talking, but I couldn't focus on what he was saying. All I could think about was the figure, how it had disappeared, how it hadn't seemed like something I could explain away. Back at the cabin, I went inside to check the windows and the doors again. Everything was locked, but when I glanced out the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, standing just outside the tree line, staring at the cabin. It was the same figure, the same presence. I didn't mention it to Sam. There was no point. He would think I was imagining things. The rest of the night passed in silence. We didn't talk much. The fire in the hearth crackled, and the shadows in the cabin grew long. Every now and then, I would hear a sound, something soft, like footsteps, but whenever I turned around, there was nothing there. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. When we woke up the next morning, I decided it was time to leave. I didn't care how much I had wanted the peace and quiet. I needed to get out of that cabin. Sam tried to convince me to stay, but I wouldn't listen. There was something wrong with that place. The isolation, the strange noises, the figure in the woods. It wasn't normal. It wasn't safe. We packed our things and left as quickly as we could. As we drove away, I couldn't help but glance back at the cabin, still sitting there in the woods, as if it had always been there and always would be. That was the last time I ever went to that cabin. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. I had found an old cabin deep in the woods, the kind that looked like it had been forgotten by time. My intention was to escape the noise of the city, get some peace, and do some much-needed thinking. I rented the place through a friend who promised me it was secluded enough for me to recharge. The drive there was long. The trees closed in on either side of the road as I got further from civilization. The GPS signal began to fade, and the air felt heavier with each passing mile. The thought crossed my mind that I should have checked the weather forecast more thoroughly, but it was too late now. The clouds were gathering overhead as I reached the cabin, just as dusk was settling in. The cabin was exactly as I had imagined, rustic, weathered, and off the beaten path. It had a large front porch with a couple of old rocking chairs, a small window above the door, and a chimney that looked as though it hadn't been used in decades. The wood that made up the walls was dark and had that familiar, musky smell that only old cabins seem to have. I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy as I stood there, staring at it. I should have felt excited, but something about the place made me feel small, as if the woods were watching me. I grabbed my bags from the car and trudged up the few stairs to the porch. The door creaked open easily, and I stepped inside, immediately hit by the smell of dust and age. It was cold inside, but the kind of cold that felt like it had been there for years, not from the chill outside. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that clung to me like a second skin. The living room was sparse, with a few mismatched pieces of furniture. A faded couch sat against one wall, and a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in decades stood opposite it. There was an old wooden dining table for chairs around it, and a small kitchen that looked as though it had been built more for show than for actual use. A staircase led to the second floor, which I assumed was where the bedrooms were. I set my bags down and made my way to the kitchen. The fridge was empty except for a few cans of what looked like expired food and some bottles of water. I wasn't hungry, but I felt compelled to open the cans, even though they looked ancient, just to see if they still worked. They didn't. It was getting darker by the minute. I went to the fireplace, grabbed some logs, and started a fire. The crackling of the flames was comforting, and for a moment, I almost forgot about the odd feeling that had settled over me. I sat back on the couch, stared into the flames, and let the silence wash over me. That's when I heard it. A sound, faint at first. A low, dragging noise coming from upstairs. It was subtle, like something heavy being pulled across the floor, but unmistakable. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe it was a raccoon or some other animal that had wandered into the cabin, but I wasn't about to go investigate. Instead, I grabbed my phone, which had a faint signal, and tried to contact my friend. No answer. Of course, no answer. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Really, it was a stupid thing to call about, but the noise upstairs was unmistakable. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate. The sound came again, closer this time, like someone was dragging something. No, dragging someone. I couldn't just sit there, but I didn't want to go upstairs either. My legs were frozen, but eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and slowly crept up the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The second floor was quieter, the air colder, as if the noise had never existed. The hallway was narrow, and the rooms off to either side were barely big enough to fit a bed and a dresser. I shone the flashlight into each room, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. No sign of whatever it was that had made that sound. I checked every room twice, then a third time just to be sure. Nothing. I felt stupid, but the whole experience had left me rattled. I went back downstairs, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being watched. The fire was still burning low in the fireplace, its orange glow flickering across the room. The cabin was silent again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. It was thick, oppressive. I had no plans to go to sleep that night, not after what had happened. But I didn't want to leave either. Something about the cabin, the woods surrounding it, made me feel like I needed to stay. It wasn't a comforting feeling, but it was a pull that I couldn't explain. As I sat in front of the fire, I thought I heard a knock, a soft, almost imperceptible knock on the door. I froze. The wind outside had picked up, but it didn't sound like wind. I got up, walked to the door, and cautiously opened it, peering into the dark woods beyond. There was no one there. My mind raced. The knocking had been real, but who could it have been? No one was supposed to be out here. I stepped outside onto the porch and scanned the area. The woods were thick, shadows stretching long in the dim light. I looked up to the sky, and for the first time I realized how far removed from the world I really was. There was no sound except for the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a branch in the distance. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and made sure all the windows were closed. I sat back down, staring into the fire again, trying to rationalize everything. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was hearing things because I was alone. But deep down, I knew there was something off about this place. Hours passed, and I eventually drifted off to sleep on the couch. My dreams were fragmented, filled with fleeting images of shadows moving in the corners of my vision, of things lurking just out of reach. It was a restless sleep, and I woke up several times, the feeling of being watched never leaving me. When morning finally came, the sun barely touched the tops of the trees. I had hoped that daylight would wash away the strange sense of dread that had settled in my chest, but it didn't. Instead, the cabin seemed colder than ever, and the shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed to stretch and shrink like they had a life of their own. I went outside to stretch my legs, hoping a walk through the woods would clear my mind. The ground was damp from the previous night's rain, and the air was thick with the smell of pine and wet earth. I walked aimlessly, lost in thought, when something caught my eye, an old, tattered rope tied to a tree. I approached it, feeling a shiver run down my spine. The rope was frayed, as if it had been there for years, maybe even decades. But the strangest part was what lay beneath it, an old, rusted metal stake driven deep into the ground. I crouched down to inspect it further, my fingers brushing against the cool, damp earth. That's when I saw it, a faint outline in the dirt. Something had been dug up recently. I dug with my hands, my heart racing as I unearthed a small, weathered box. It was old, its wood cracked and warped with age. I could feel my pulse quicken as I opened it, revealing the contents inside. A collection of bones, some small, some larger, all twisted and mangled in a way that made my stomach turn. I backed away, my mind racing to make sense of what I had found. I didn't want to think about what it meant, but deep down I knew. This wasn't just an abandoned cabin. This was something else. I turned and ran back to the cabin, my feet slipping in the mud, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I couldn't stay here any longer. I grabbed my things, throwing them into my bag without thinking. My hands were shaking. I needed to leave to get out of this place. The door slammed shut behind me as I ran to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drove away, the cabin grew smaller in my rearview mirror. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. The woods had eyes, and no matter how far I drove, I knew I would never escape them. The cabin was isolated, far enough from the nearest town that you couldn't even make out the distant hum of city life. No streetlights, no neighbors, the kind of place where, if something went wrong, no one would hear you scream. I had rented the cabin for a weekend getaway. Just me, some quiet time, and a chance to escape from the noise of everyday life. My friends and family thought I was crazy. Why spend the weekend alone in the woods? But that was the whole point. I wanted peace. I wanted solitude. I wanted to clear my mind. The cabin wasn't anything fancy, just a small, rustic place. It looked like something you'd see in an old, forgotten photograph. Wooden planks, a stone chimney, and a weathered porch with a rocking chair that creaked whenever the wind blew. It was exactly what I was looking for. Simple, quiet, and remote. The perfect place to disconnect from everything. I arrived in the late afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip behind the trees. The drive had been long, 4 hours through winding roads and thick forests. The kind of place where you start to wonder if you've missed the turnoff. But eventually, I pulled into the gravel driveway and parked next to the cabin. I carried my bags inside and set up. There wasn't much to do other than settle in, but I liked it that way. I didn't need a TV, didn't need Wi-Fi. I just wanted the silence, the sound of the wind rustling the trees, the occasional bird call. It was all I needed to feel the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. The first night was calm. I made a small fire in the wood stove and sat by it, sipping tea and reading a book. The night was crisp, cool, and peaceful. I went to bed early, tired from the long drive, and fell into a deep sleep. But something was wrong. It wasn't the kind of wrong that woke you up immediately, but the kind that settled in slowly. I woke up in the middle of the night, my eyes snapping open without warning. First, I didn't know why. It wasn't like I heard a noise or felt scared. It was just a feeling, a heaviness in the air. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what had woken me. The wind outside had picked up, the branches of the trees creaking and scraping against the roof. But that wasn't it. It wasn't the wind. It was something else. I sat up, my eyes scanning the room. The cabin was still, too still. The fire in the stove had long since burned out, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon through the window. The shadows seemed deeper than they should be, stretching unnaturally across the floor. For a moment, I wondered if I'd left a light on somewhere. But no, I was certain I hadn't. The silence was oppressive. It pressed against me, filling the room, making it hard to breathe. I checked the time on my phone. 3:22 a.m. I had no reason to be awake at this hour, but here I was wide awake, staring into the darkness. I decided to get up. Maybe I was just being paranoid, or maybe the isolation was playing tricks on my mind. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain, looking out into the woods. The moon was high, casting long shadows over the trees. The forest was still as everything else. But that's when I noticed it. A figure standing just beyond the edge of the tree line. It was hard to make out in the dim light, but there was definitely something there. A tall figure, not moving, just standing there, staring into the cabin. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see its face, not clearly, but I knew it was watching me. I knew it had been standing there for a while. I didn't even remember hearing footsteps. It was just there, and now it was staring right at me. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to move, to pull away from the window, but I couldn't. Something about that figure kept me rooted to the spot. It wasn't like I was paralyzed with fear. It was more like a magnet drawing me in, a pull I couldn't resist. I stood there for what felt like forever, just watching. Then, slowly, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees. The moment it moved, I snapped out of my trance. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I backed away from the window, almost tripping over the rug as I stumbled back into the room. I stood there, my mind racing. What the hell had I just seen? Had I imagined it? Was it a trick of the light? It was too dark to make out any real details, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Couldn't go back to bed after that. I was wide awake, my mind spinning with thoughts. I grabbed my phone, checked the time again. It was still 3:30 a.m. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, just some random person wandering through the woods. But then I remembered, this cabin was miles from the nearest road. No one was supposed to be out here. No one. I debated whether to go outside and check, but that idea seemed foolish. What if it wasn't just a person? What if there was something else out there? I thought of the stories I had heard about the woods around this area. Stories of strange happenings, unexplained noises, things that didn't make sense. The kind of stories that could make you doubt your own sanity if you listened long enough. I spent the rest of the night pacing the cabin, checking the windows and doors, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. But every little sound, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind outside, set my nerves on edge. By the time morning came, I was exhausted. The sun had barely risen, and I hadn't slept a wink. I packed up my things, got into my car, and drove back to town, my heart still racing, my mind still haunted by what I had seen, or thought I had seen. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just my imagination working overtime. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't coming back to that cabin again. The whole drive home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the rearview mirror. But there was nothing there, just the empty road stretching out behind me. By the time I got back to my apartment, I had mostly calmed down. I kept telling myself it was just a weird experience. Nothing more. Maybe a combination of exhaustion and being alone in the woods had played tricks on my mind. But then I got a call from the cabin owner. "Hello," I answered, surprised. "Hey, just wanted to make sure everything was okay with the cabin. You didn't have any issues, did you?" "No, everything was fine," I said, trying to sound casual. Good. You know, there's been some talk around here about people seeing things, strange things late at night, but it's probably just the isolation. The mind plays tricks when you're out there alone for too long." I felt my stomach drop. "What kind of things?" The owner hesitated. "Nothing to worry about, just stories. People think they see things in the woods, strange shapes, figures, but they're always gone by morning. Don't let it bother you." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? I had already seen something, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know any more about it. I hung up, my thoughts swirling. The last thing I wanted was to know more about whatever haunted those woods. But in a way, I had to admit, knowing there were others who had seen the same thing made me feel less insane. It wasn't my imagination. There was something out there, something watching. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't a bad thing. Maybe it was just nature, the wild, untamed part of the world, reminding me that I was just a visitor here, passing through. A fleeting moment in its vast, uncharted wilderness. I didn't go back to that cabin. In fact, I didn't even visit the woods again. But I still think about it sometimes. Wonder what it was that I saw and why it was there. And if it's still out there, waiting, watching. It doesn't matter, though. I'm not going back. Some things are better left unexplored. I never thought I'd end up in a place like this. I had been looking forward to getting away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, craving some peace and quiet. A cabin, isolated and tucked deep in the woods, seemed like the perfect escape. The idea was simple enough, just a weekend getaway. No cell service, no distractions, just nature and time to unwind. How could I have known it would turn into something else? The cabin itself was older than I'd imagined, its logs weathered by years of storms and wind. I had booked it online, a quaint little place that looked like something straight out of a postcard. I should have known something was off when the woman at the rental office handed me the key without a smile, her hands cold as ice. She didn't say much, just pointed down the road to where I was supposed to go. I thought it was just her personality, maybe an off day. But now, looking back, I can't help but wonder if she knew something I didn't. It was a 2-hour drive from the nearest town, the road getting smaller and more winding as I ventured further into the forest. The trees closed in, the air growing thick and damp. The road had ruts in it, and the further I went, the less sure I became that I was going the right way. When I finally saw the cabin through the trees, I felt a small sense of relief. It was perfect in its isolation, surrounded by nothing but towering pines and the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. I couldn't have asked for more peace. I parked my car, grabbed my bags, and made my way up the rickety porch steps. The door creaked loudly when I pushed it open. Inside, it smelled musty, like old wood and damp earth. Dust hung in the air, and the furniture, though old, seemed sturdy enough. There was a large stone fireplace in the living room, a couple of armchairs, and a worn-out sofa. It wasn't much, but it was all I needed. I set my bags down and looked around, already feeling more at ease. The windows were framed with thick curtains that blocked out most of the light, leaving the room dim. I opened them, letting the late afternoon sunlight spill in. The place was beautiful in its own way, rustic, with its charm rooted in age. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees and darkness started to settle in, I made myself a simple meal in the small kitchen. There was something oddly calming about the solitude. I thought I might go to bed early, start fresh in the morning. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of animals in the underbrush. I decided to make a fire before bed, wanting the warmth and light as the evening grew colder. The crackling of the wood added a comforting layer to the stillness. I sat there in front of the fire for a while, watching the flames dance, my mind wandering. That's when I heard it, a noise outside, faint but unmistakable. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, something common in the woods. But then I heard it again, a thud, followed by a dragging sound. It wasn't the kind of sound an animal would make. My pulse quickened, and I stood up, stepping toward the window. I didn't see anything at first, just the blackened silhouettes of trees and the pale moonlight filtering through the branches. But the sound came again, closer this time. I went to the door, quietly opening it and stepping out onto the porch. The night air hit me like a chill, but I stayed still, straining my ears. The sound wasn't coming from the forest, like I expected. It was coming from the back of the cabin. For a moment, I stood there, debating whether I should go investigate or just ignore it. Maybe it was just an animal or a neighbor coming up the trail, but something about it didn't sit right. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag, clicked it on, and walked around the cabin to the back. The ground was uneven, the trees pressing in from all sides. The light from the flashlight danced across the ground, my footsteps crunching on the dry leaves. Then I saw it, a figure in the distance, barely visible among the trees. It was standing still, just out of the beam of my flashlight, as if it was watching me. I froze, heart thudding in my chest. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to turn and run back inside, but I couldn't take my eyes off the figure. After what felt like an eternity, it finally moved, stepping deeper into the woods. I stood there for a moment longer, unsure of what I had just seen, but the night was silent again, and the figure was gone. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination playing tricks on me, but I decided to call it a night. I locked the door behind me, bolted the windows, and drew the curtains. There was something unsettling about the entire experience, but I tried to brush it off. I went to bed, the sound of the wind in the trees lulling me into a restless sleep. I didn't expect to be alone in the cabin when I first arrived. It was supposed to be a getaway, just me, a few days of peace and quiet, disconnected from the rest of the world. I rented it for the solitude, the escape from everything: work, family, and even friends. The old wooden cabin sat at the edge of a small forest, miles away from the nearest neighbor. The kind of place you imagine in a postcard, with a small stream running through the yard and the constant rustling of leaves in the wind. But there was something strange about the place as soon as I stepped out of my car and looked around. The air felt heavier, like the kind of weight you get when you're standing in a room filled with unspoken words. I shrugged it off as just nerves. Of course, I'd feel that way. It was my first time being so far out alone. The cabin itself was older than I expected. Its rough-hewn logs had a deep gray tint from years of exposure to the elements, and the roof sagged just a little. But the door was solid and the windows were clean. The owner had promised it was in good shape. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, expecting to feel a sense of comfort, but instead, there was a sort of emptiness in the air. The wooden floors creaked underfoot, and the faint scent of mildew lingered in the corners. I set my bags down and looked around, trying to familiarize myself with the place. There was a small kitchen to the left, with a simple stove and an old wood-burning fireplace. A few mismatched chairs sat around a wooden table in the center of the room, and the walls were decorated with faded paintings of landscapes I didn't recognize. To the right, a narrow hallway led to two bedrooms, one small and cozy-looking, the other larger and filled with an assortment of old furniture. I chose the smaller bedroom. It had a single bed with an old quilt, a small nightstand with a lamp, and a window that overlooked the forest. As I unpacked, I tried to ignore the strange feeling that crept into my mind, like I wasn't alone. It wasn't any one thing in particular, just a general unease, the kind of feeling you get when you walk into a room where someone's been watching you for longer than you realized. I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. The cabin was surrounded by dense woods, but there was a path that wound its way through the trees, probably leading to the stream I had noticed earlier. I stepped outside, breathing in the fresh, earthy air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground, and the light filtering through the trees made everything look like a scene out of a painting. It was beautiful, and for a moment, I felt at peace. But as I walked deeper into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't like there was any immediate danger. No creepy figure lurking behind a tree or strange noises in the distance. It was just this quiet, nagging discomfort, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the isolation getting to me. I wasn't used to being so far from civilization. The path led me down to the stream, where the sound of rushing water filled the air. I stopped for a moment, staring at the clear water as it flowed over rocks, making its way through the valley. The sound of the water was calming, and I found myself relaxing, focusing on the gentle flow of the current. That's when I heard it, a rustling sound behind me, deep in the woods. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a squirrel or a deer, but the noise was too deliberate, too close. My heart started to race as I stood there, frozen, listening. The rustling continued, just out of my line of sight, and it sounded like something, or someone, was moving through the underbrush, heading in my direction. I turned around quickly, my eyes scanning the trees, but there was nothing there. The woods were still, too still. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the unease settled deeper in my chest. I walked back to the cabin faster than I had come. The sun was lower now, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, creeping along the ground. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. When I got back to the cabin, I locked the door behind me and stood there for a moment, listening. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees outside, but that feeling of being watched wouldn't leave. I went to the kitchen to fix a quick dinner, trying to distract myself from the strange thoughts creeping into my mind. As I ate, I noticed something odd. The lights in the cabin flickered. It wasn't just a brief flicker. They dimmed and brightened, like they were struggling to stay on. I stood up, walked over to the light switch, and turned it on and off a few times. Nothing. The lights flickered again, then went completely out. I cursed under my breath. Of course, the power would go out in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and started checking the fuse box, hoping it was something simple, but everything seemed fine. The wires were intact, and the fuse box was in good condition. I walked around the cabin with the flashlight, checking all the lights, and everything was dead. At that point, I knew I couldn't just sit in the dark. I had to do something. So, I bundled up in a thick jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and decided to go out to the shed to see if I could find any candles or backup lanterns. The shed was just behind the cabin, a small, weather-beaten structure that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I stepped out onto the porch, feeling the cold air hit my skin. The night was darker now, and the forest was completely silent. No rustling, no animals. Just the oppressive quiet that seemed to swallow everything. The shed door creaked as I opened it. Inside, it smelled of old wood and dampness. I moved cautiously around the clutter, searching for a lantern or candles, but everything was piled up in a mess. I found an old lantern in the corner and pulled it out, relieved to find that it still worked after I lit the wick. I stood there for a moment, holding the lantern, its soft glow casting long shadows across the shed's interior. Then I heard it again, a rustling sound, only this time it was much closer. My breath caught in my throat as I turned toward the door, my heart hammering in my chest. For a moment, I considered running back to the cabin, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I stood there, frozen, staring into the darkness of the woods. Then I saw it, a figure, barely visible in the dark, moving between the trees. I couldn't make out any details, just a vague shape, tall and thin, almost like it was blending into the darkness itself. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. Who would be out there in the middle of nowhere at this hour? The figure moved again, and I heard the distinct sound of footsteps crunching on the leaves. It wasn't an animal. This was something deliberate, something human. I rushed back to the cabin, slamming the shed door behind me. I locked it, then locked the front door. My pulse was racing, my thoughts spinning. I stood in the living room, the lantern casting strange shadows across the walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was outside, watching. I grabbed my phone, hoping to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. I tried over and over, but the screen stayed blank, the network dead. It didn't matter how many times I pressed the button. I was completely cut off. That's when I heard the knock. A single, soft knock at the front door. It was barely audible, but it sent a jolt of terror through me. I stood still, holding my breath, hoping that whoever or whatever was out there would go away. But then it came again, louder this time, more deliberate. 3 knocks. I felt trapped. There was no way out, no way to escape. I couldn't call for help, and the only thing separating me from whatever was out there was a single wooden door. My mind raced through every possible scenario, none of them good. I tried to steady my breathing, to think logically, but the panic was rising. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. I waited for what seemed like hours, just standing there, listening for any sign of movement. But nothing came. The only sound was the quiet hum of the lantern's flame and the steady ticking of the old clock on the wall. I finally dared to move. I walked cautiously to the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. I paused, listening one last time, but all was still. I opened the door. There was nothing there. The porch was empty, the darkness swallowing everything. No footprints in the dirt, no sign that anyone had been there at all. My mind was spinning, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Had I imagined the knocking? Had the isolation gotten to me? I don't know what happened that night. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I packed up and left, not looking back. I never went back to that cabin, and I never tried to explain what happened. I told myself it was just a bad experience, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something that wanted me to stay. And I knew, without a doubt, that it was watching me, waiting for the right moment. Maybe I thought I needed the isolation, time away from the world, away from the noise. Maybe I just needed something different. Life had felt stuck lately, like I was going through the motions without actually living. I told myself a few days alone in the woods would clear my mind, let me reset. I found the place on some rental site. It was cheap, far from anything, exactly what I was looking for. The pictures showed an old but sturdy cabin, tucked into the trees with a small river running nearby. No service, no Wi-Fi. That was part of the appeal. The idea of being unreachable sounded nice, at least at the time. The drive took longer than expected. The roads got worse the deeper I went, turning from pavement to gravel to dirt. My tires skidded more than once, and the trees pressed in close. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was already setting. It looked like the pictures, simple, a little rundown, but solid. A narrow porch wrapped around the front, with a single rocking chair beside the door. There was a stack of firewood leaning against the side. I grabbed my bag and went in. The inside was basic but clean. A small kitchen, a couch, a wood-burning stove. The bedroom was just big enough for a bed and a dresser. There was no TV, no radio, just silence. I unpacked, made a quick dinner, and sat outside for a while, listening to the sounds of the woods. The air was cool, the trees barely moving in the breeze. It was peaceful, exactly what I'd wanted. That first night, I slept fine. The quiet took some getting used to, but I woke up feeling rested. I spent the day exploring, following the river, climbing a ridge to get a better view of the valley below. There wasn't another house in sight, just trees stretching for miles. I was careful to mark my way back. I wasn't an experienced hiker, and I didn't want to get turned around. It was easy to lose your sense of direction out there, with everything looking the same. By late afternoon, I was back at the cabin. I made a fire, cooked some food, and sat outside as the sun went down. That was when I noticed something that felt off. The woods had gone silent. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the more I listened, the more I realized I wasn't. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves. Just stillness. The kind that makes your skin crawl, that tells you something isn't right. I told myself it was normal, that animals go quiet sometimes, that maybe a predator was nearby. A bear, maybe, or a mountain lion. That made sense. Still, I went inside earlier than I'd planned, locked the door, double-checked the windows. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. A sound woke me up. It wasn't loud, but it was close. A soft, steady thump, coming from outside. I held my breath, listening. Thump, pause, thump. It sounded like something heavy hitting wood. I sat up, heart hammering. It was coming from the porch. I told myself it was nothing. An animal, maybe, a branch falling. But then I heard it again. A slow, deliberate weight pressing against the porch boards. I stayed still. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just listened. The sound stopped. I waited. 5 minutes, maybe 10. Then, just as I started to think it was my imagination, the porch creaked. Just once, like someone shifting their weight. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and held it tight. I wanted to look to know for sure, but something in me, the same part that had noticed the silence earlier, told me not to. I stayed where I was, listening, waiting. After a long time, I must have drifted off. When I woke up, it was morning, and everything was normal again. The birds were back. The woods felt alive. But when I stepped onto the porch, my stomach dropped. There were footprints in the dirt. Not boot prints, bare feet, human. They led up to the porch, stopped at the door, then turned and disappeared back into the trees. I stared at them for a long time. My first thought was that someone had been messing with me, some local trying to scare me off. But that didn't make sense. Why walk barefoot through the woods? Why not knock or say something? I checked my phone, knowing there was no service, but needing to do something. I thought about packing up, leaving right then, but I told myself I was overreacting. I come here to be alone, and maybe I was just letting that get to me. Still, I spent the day close to the cabin. I kept the fire going, kept my back to the walls when I sat outside. When night came, I locked the door and pushed a chair under the handle. I barely slept. Every sound made me flinch. Every shift of the wind set me on edge. But nothing happened. Morning came and the footprints were gone. Not covered, not washed away, just gone. The dirt looked untouched, like no one had ever been there. I left that day. I didn't pack everything, just the essentials. I threw my bag into the car, started the engine, and didn't look back. The road felt longer on the way out, the trees closer. The whole time, I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the woods, watching me leave. I don't know what I heard that night. I don't know who or what left those footprints, but I know I wasn't alone. I don't know why I agreed to the trip. Maybe it was the stress at work, or maybe it was the way Mark kept insisting that getting out into the woods would do me some good. Either way, I found myself driving up a dirt road, deep into the mountains, to a cabin that barely showed up on any map. Mark had found it online, one of those secluded places that promised absolute peace and quiet. I should have known better. The drive alone was enough to make me uneasy. The road narrowed the farther I went, thick trees pressing in from both sides. I hadn't seen another car for over an hour. The last sign of civilization was a rundown gas station where the old man behind the counter barely spoke. Just eyed me like he knew something I didn't. I filled up my tank, bought a pack of bottled water, and got back on the road, pushing away the strange feeling gnawing at me. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was setting. The place looked exactly like the pictures, small, made of dark wood, with a front porch that sagged slightly under its own weight. There was no driveway, just a clearing where I parked my car. The trees stretched tall around me, their bare branches swaying slightly in the evening wind. I stepped out and stretched, breathing in the crisp air. Smelled clean, untouched. Still, something about the place felt off. Maybe it was the silence. No birds, no rustling in the bushes, just stillness. I grabbed my bags from the car and made my way up the porch. The wood creaked under my weight. The key was under a rusted metal lantern, just like Mark said it would be. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and old wood. The furniture was basic: a couch, a small kitchen table, a single rocking chair by the fireplace. A narrow hallway led to the bedroom and bathroom. I set my bags down and flipped on a light. It buzzed and flickered before holding steady. I checked my phone. No signal. That was expected. Mark had warned me that service was spotty up here. I had brought books, a flashlight, extra batteries. I'd be fine for a weekend. I made myself a quick dinner, ate in silence, and cleaned up. The stillness pressed in around me, like the trees outside were listening, waiting. I shook the thought away and decided to turn in early. The bed was stiff but clean, the blankets smelling of cedar. I left the lamp on as I lay down, staring at the ceiling. Something about the cabin unsettled me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was just the isolation. I closed my eyes. I woke up suddenly, heart pounding. first, I didn't know why. The room was quiet, the lamp still on. I sat up, listening. Then I heard it. A soft shuffle, like something moving just outside the cabin. I held my breath. The sound came again, slow, deliberate. It wasn't an animal. It was footsteps. I stayed completely still, listening. The footsteps circled the cabin, crunching over dead leaves. My mind raced. Who would be out here? There were no other cabins nearby, no trails. No reason for anyone to be here. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could and grabbed the flashlight from my bag. I crept to the window and peered out, but the porch light barely reached past the clearing. The woods were too dark to see anything. Then the footsteps stopped. A long, heavy silence filled the air. I strained to hear, my pulse loud in my ears. Nothing. I waited for what felt like an eternity before finally stepping back from the window. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe a deer or some other animal had wandered close. Still, I locked the door, double-checking that it was secure. Back in bed, I left the flashlight beside me, just in case. Sleep didn't come easily, but eventually exhaustion won. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains. I lay there for a moment, replaying the night in my head. Had it really happened? I got up and checked outside. The ground was disturbed. The leaves shuffled in a way that looked unnatural. But no footprints, no signs of anyone. Shaking off the unease, I decided to go for a short hike. Maybe some fresh air would help clear my mind. I grabbed my jacket, stuffed a bottle of water in my bag, and headed out. The forest was dense, the air cold and damp. I followed a narrow trail, my boots crunching over twigs. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind me. Then I found something strange. A small clearing, almost perfectly circular. In the center, a pile of rocks, stacked neatly. Something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't meant to be touched. The woods around it were too quiet. No wind, no movement. I stepped closer. The rocks weren't just stacked, they were arranged almost like a marker. I didn't like it. Something about it made my stomach twist. I turned and headed back to the cabin, walking faster than before. That night, the footsteps came again. Slow, deliberate. This time, I was fully awake, gripping the flashlight with sweaty hands. The footsteps circled the cabin, stopping near the window. Then, a soft tap. Not a knock, just the lightest touch against the glass. My breath caught. I stayed perfectly still, my heart hammering. Another tap. Slow, precise. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I wanted to turn off the lamp, but I was too afraid to move. The tapping stopped. The silence stretched on, pressing against my ears. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Then finally, footsteps, moving away, fading into the trees. I didn't sleep. I sat there, flashlight in hand, waiting for the sun. The first light, I packed my bags. I didn't care if it was early. I wasn't staying another night. I stepped outside, my car covered in a thin layer of frost. As I threw my bags in the trunk, something caught my eye. Footprints. Not mine. Not animal tracks. Bare feet, leading from the woods, circling the cabin, stopping at my window. My stomach turned. I jumped into the car, locking the doors, starting the engine with shaking hands. As I pulled away, I saw something in the trees, a figure just beyond the clearing, too far to see clearly, but close enough to know it was watching me. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I drove straight home, only pulling over once I hit the main road, my hands still trembling on the wheel. I never told Mark what happened, never went back to that cabin. Some places aren't meant to be visited. Some things are better left alone. The cabin was supposed to be an escape, a break from everything, the endless emails, the noise of the city, the way life felt like it was pressing in on me. I had rented it for a full week, planning to do nothing but breathe fresh air, hike, maybe read a book or two. It was in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods of northern Minnesota. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just me and the quiet. The drive up was long, winding roads through thick forests. The deeper I got, the fewer cars I saw. Eventually, there were none at all. Just trees stretching high, blotting out the sun in some places. The cabin itself was small, old but sturdy. It sat at the end of a narrow dirt road, surrounded by nothing but woods. The first night was fine. I made a fire in the stone fireplace, cooked a simple meal, and sat outside on the porch, listening to the wind move through the trees. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet you don't get in the city. I went to bed feeling relaxed for the first time in months. The second day, I explored the area. There was an old trail behind the cabin, barely visible under years of fallen leaves and overgrown brush. I followed it for a while, pushing deeper into the woods, but turned back when I realized how easy it would be to get lost. There were no markers, no signs, nothing, just trees and silence. That night, something woke me up. A noise outside, a rustling sound, slow and deliberate. It wasn't the wind. I knew what wind sounded like. This was different. I stayed in bed, listening, my heart beating harder than it should have been. After a while, it stopped. The next morning, I checked around the cabin. There were no footprints, no signs of animals. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was still adjusting to the solitude. But that day, while I was out by the fire pit, I noticed something odd. The stack of firewood against the cabin wall had been disturbed. Some pieces had been moved, others knocked over. I hadn't touched them. That night, I locked the door. I double-checked it. As I was getting into bed, I heard it again, the rustling. But this time, there was something else. A faint creaking sound, like wood bending under weight, like footsteps on the porch. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. It was slow. One step, then another, then nothing. I don't know how long I stayed awake, but eventually, exhaustion won. The morning was cold. I stepped outside, feeling the crisp air on my face. The first thing I saw was the firewood pile. It had been moved again. This time, it wasn't just disturbed. It was arranged, stacked in a strange way, like someone had been playing with it. A small pyramid. A pit settled in my stomach. I looked around, scanning the woods, but everything was still. Too still. The way the air felt right before a storm. I spent the day inside, keeping the door locked. I tried to read, tried to distract myself, but my eyes kept flicking to the window, watching the trees. That night, I kept the lights on. The fire burned low in the fireplace, casting flickering shadows. I forced myself to stay awake. I wasn't going to let my imagination get the best of me. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it again. The rustling, then the steps. Slow, deliberate. This time, they didn't stop at the porch. They moved around the cabin, a full circle. I held my breath, gripping the blanket in my fists. The footsteps paused near the back of the cabin. Then I heard it, a soft tap, like fingers against the wood. 3 taps, then silence. I stayed awake until the sun came up. When I finally stepped outside, I saw it, near the back wall of the cabin. A small pile of stones, stacked neatly, like the firewood. Something was watching me. I packed my things. I didn't care that I had 4 nights left. I wasn't staying. I shoved everything into my car, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. The trees felt closer, the air heavier. As I backed out of the dirt driveway, I looked once more at the cabin. There was someone standing at the treeline, too far to see clearly, but close enough to know they were watching. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just drove. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I was miles away. I never went back.